Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to Moneycontrol Policy Next, the 10 trillion rupees infrastructure push. It's co-powered by Reliance Industries Limited and associate partner AU Small Finance Bank. I'm your host, Meghna Mittal, Deputy News Editor with Moneycontrol. India is en route to becoming the third largest economy. And its focus on infrastructure has had the world sit up and take notice. India's spending on infrastructure has gone up multiple times over the last decade. As we kickstart the policy series, we hope to deep dive into India's mega infrastructure push, India's vision for the future, and how it is scripting a turnaround in infrastructure delivery. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Binoy Prabhakar, Editor, Moneycontrol, to please officially open the series and deliver his introductory remarks.
The other day, I was talking to a friend in Delhi who said he wants to relocate to Bengaluru. I asked him why. He said, thanks to the brand new Bengaluru-Mysuru expressway, he can drive to his hometown in Kerala in just 5 hours. People in Bengaluru these days talk about having Mysuru masala dosha for breakfast in Mysuru. I think this is remarkable. A drive to Ooty over a weekend has also become much easier. The Bengaluru-Mysuru Expressway is emblematic of the far-reaching impact and infrastructure can have on society and ease of living. With one expressway, the government has changed the fortunes of 3 states, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. So there's a reason why Infra is the theme that's going to take center stage today. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to host you at the first ever Moneycontrol Policy Next conference. We've conceived Policy Next as a series of gatherings that will help us catch up with policymakers and the who's who of a particular sector to understand and examine its biggest shifts. We settled on infrastructure, a vital sector, to kick off the series. And we have none other than Union Minister Nitin Gadkari as the chief guest today. Mr. Gadkari, who will join us in some time, has been tasked with steering the government's unwavering focus on infrastructure. As we know, he has been busy. Not a month goes by without a world-class highway sprouting across India. Of course, Mr. Gadkari's association with infrastructure is hardly new. As a minister in the Maharashtra government, he was instrumental in connecting Mumbai to neighboring Pune with an expressway, the kind which India had not seen before. We also have Dr. Rajiv Kumar, former Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, and Chancellor Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, Mr. R.C. Bhargava, Chairman Maruti, and a number of key stakeholders from the industry here. Infrastructure in India stands at an inflection point today. The focus now is on multimodal infrastructure development to cut logistics costs and improve the ease of doing business. Highways, railways, shipping and aviation have all adopted ambitious targets for enhancing the logistical efficiency of the country. So there's no better time than now to ask some pertinent questions. In this period of radical change for the infra industry, how can it evolve to be truly transformative? What actions can the government and the private sector take to reimagine the future? At Moneycontrol, it's our constant endeavor to find answers to these questions. Our journalism seeks to inform and inspire. We hope the deliberations today will lead to impactful insights to guide the industry on the way forward. Please join me in welcoming the speakers and hope you enjoy the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Binoy, for those thought-provoking remarks. We are really looking forward to an exciting evening. Ladies and gentlemen, you're please free to tweet with the hashtag MCPolicyNext. Now, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Rajiv Kumar, a renowned economist, a thought leader, a policy maker, to deliver the inaugural address. An infrastructure boom in the works. What's different this time? And how can infrastructure transform economies? Dr. Kumar, please welcome Dr. Kumar.
Good evening, everybody. And thanks to Moneycontrol to invite me, despite the fact that I'm now a former vice chairman. So thanks, and gives me this opportunity to talk about, I think, one of the most critical aspects of India's economic development. By the way, I'm also now the chairman, and this is a blurb. This is a, how do you say the blurb, for my NGO called the Pehle India Foundation. Please visit his website. And I chair it. It was established in 2013. And we're working on topics like the infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, you would realize in the 10 minutes that I have or so, what I'll try and do is outline what are the issues, what is the government approach to it, and what I think will be the impact of this approach and these issues on our economic development and going forward. So, the Prime Minister recently, if you remember, said that India aspires to be a developed economy by 2047. My friend Surjit Bhalla came up and said that that's easily done because $18,000 per capita in PPP terms can be achieved because currently it's about $6,500 by growing at about 4.8% per annum for the next 25 years. And I replied to that in saying that this is too weak, too low target to have, a growth of per capita income growth of 4.8, because I personally feel, and I've argued for that in Niti Aayog and elsewhere, that India can and must grow at more than 6% increase per annum in per capita incomes as we go forward. That will lead you about a 7% GDP growth, given that our population growth is now is less than about 1%. And even that, I think, is an underestimate of sorts, because OECD in 2012 had estimated India's rate of growth of potential output at 8% GDP growth. And I think that's achievable, and we did that. From 2003 to 2011, we grew at 8.3% for 8 years. Now, if we can do that now, then surely with all the work that's been done in the last 9 years with this government, we can, and all the reforms, the tough reforms that have been taken, the ease of, etc., we can go back into that. I think we can approach 8% per annum growth in GDP, and I honestly believe that, in the sense that it's not a hyperbole. I'm not trying to, but you have to work very hard for it. It will not happen with business as usual. And that's what an infrastructure development is, a part of not doing business as usual that you did for the last 50 years or last 70 years. And if you do that 8%, friends, or 7.8% or whatever, something like that, your size of the economy in PPP terms would be $48 trillion in 2047. And you will probably be the second largest economy in the world. Now that's, target, well, you can easily say that, and easier said than done. But a critical aspect of that is infrastructure. I think one of the most, we have perennially recognized that there are 4 or 5, by the way, taking a step back, how do we define infrastructure? And as an economist, I would say that you've got to include the social sectors, which is education and health and governance, as a part of infrastructure. Because if infrastructure is the structure, the condition in which the private sector can do business and thrive, those generalized conditions of production, as an outdated man called Marx called them, that the generalized conditions of production include all these things, right? So let's agree that here we are talking only about physical infrastructure, and that's the definition that we're talking about, and that includes, in my ways, the railways, the highways, the waterways, the airports, the seaports, and energy, right? So that's a huge sort of, extent of the economy, as you can see, that very large, the employment generated here, the value created here, the multiplier effects are immense, huge. But the most important thing that I would want to point out to you is that there is no other country in the world, or has not been in the human history, that has had to do this. By the way, urbanization is yet another part of infrastructure. There is no other country in the world history which has developed its infrastructure while becoming greener. While greener is the key. So growth with green is India's destiny, and it's the planet's destiny. Because if we don't do that, if we develop our infrastructure in all the huge greenhouse gas emission ways and using the piles of concrete pouring and the chemical and all of that, and the steel of our hard to abate sectors like the steel and the cement, etc., they don't shift to to greener forms of production, like for example using hydrogen in your blast furnaces or replacing and so on. We are not going to let me say that we won't be able to achieve, surely not achieve the 2070 target of net zero, but we may not even live to see, as it were, without some, because the window for climate is closing very rapidly. So India has this challenge for developing this infrastructure while becoming greener, and therefore I think the focus has to be not just on listing the multimodal infrastructure development, etc., but now to talk much more about the innovations that you need in developing this infrastructure. And I think that's where the focus should go, because I think otherwise the numbers are quite clear, because we know that, for example, the logistics cost in India is 14%, and the rest of the world is 8%, so therefore you've got to bring it down. Bringing it down by 6 percentage points is not easy, but you've got to do this while actually becoming greener as well. So therefore, that means either you would have additional costs, which will make you less competitive, and therefore, because all the costs will have to be borne by the producers, by the economic agents, or you have to have this very innovative approach towards infrastructure development. Now, one of the focus of this has to be the energy sector, because energy and the targets have been laid out: renewable energy, solar, 500 megawatts, 20%, etc. But in Niti, we started the electric, EV revolution that started in Niti Aayog. That's going forward. But some people from reputable IITs tell me that if you take the total carbon cost of an electric vehicle and the batteries included, we are not sure whether you're becoming greener. And whether, so you need to go back and then look into, this is why Niti Aayog went on to talking about hydrogen. We're talking about green hydrogen. We're talking about electrolyzers. We're talking about fuel cells. We're encouraging, companies. I think it's called Acme. Manoj Upadhyay, who's put up a plant in Bikaner, very small one, and he's putting up one in Oman. And you're talking about steel and cement and concrete and all of that, where you've got to have the greener option going forward. So energy is key, and whether if you go energy, then you go to renewables, you go to solar, and then wind, and maybe geothermal and hydro. A lot of that energy is time seasonal, right? Because and therefore, can it bear the base load, as it were? Now that's the innovation that you require. How do you make energy, renewable energy, the provider of base load in the country? So then you come into storage, then you come into large-scale storage, whether it's going to be lithium or it's going to be some other chemistry, etc. So, but this is just an example, and I'm saying therefore that you got to. This is the focus that you got to become. Now here, the Prime Minister is very clear that he will focus on innovation. And he is therefore also focusing on the other aspect of it, which is that, you got to reverse, the decline in the share of the railways, that has happened. We've declined from about 80%, 85%, now to 27%. That just, so your infrastructure development cannot take place the way it's happened in the US, and highways. All kudos to Nitinji for having done what he has done. But the fact is that the new start has to be made on making railways far more efficient, far more energy conservation, and getting the technology there. And Vande Bharat is, in my view, just a start. I was the Prime Minister's Prime Minister's envoy chairing the Joint Committee for High-Speed Rail, from Ahmedabad to Mumbai. And that's probably the future if you go forward. That how do you make that happen? And how do you make, if you do that, can you imagine that Ahmedabad, Mumbai would be a 2.5-hour journey or even less. So you could do everything and go back. And Mumbai, Delhi, 1,200 kilometers can, at the speed of 320 kilometers per hour, can be a 4-hour journey. The whole economic geography will change. And that's the call of infrastructure. Infrastructure changes the economic geography of a country, so that you can think about commuting times, commuting distances, just getting collapsed completely. With the RTR, for example, from Delhi Meerut, people would easily stay in Meerut and come and work in Delhi, as they do in Japan. People from Osaka come into Tokyo, and so that's the big thing that you need to think about. That how from now till 2047, and that's where I think a lot of us should focus on, which is what is the new contours of economic geography in the country? Will it remain? I used to always, and this is, let me put it this way, that if we are able to develop the infrastructure the way I think it should be developed, with focus more on the eastern region than the western one, it will bring about equity. It will bring about equity in a major way. I've always pointed this out. You can look at India like that, and you drop a line here, which passes through a town close to my hometown called Kanpur, and the west is the crescent of growth. If India is growing at 7%, this NCR, Rajasthan, Kota, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Rajkot, Mumbai, Pune, Bangalore, Chennai is probably growing at 12. And there's this part, what I call the fist of poverty, is probably growing at 4 or 5. And this leads to this huge thing, the migration. Now, we are not a China, and we are not therefore 98%, none of us. So this migration from the inner provinces to the coastal countries, I'm not sure if that is sustainable in our state. And in China, you get 500 million people moving from the coastline to the western and central provinces. We can't. So therefore, the Prime Minister's focus on developing infrastructure in the northeast, because our growth model will have to be to create jobs where the people are. And that, to make that happen, you need that infrastructure. You need to reduce the time, for output to come from northeast Tripura to the port in, port in Calcutta. You've got to create regional transport networks between, let's say, all the northern states and into Chittagong. Because at 1940s onwards, Assam was the largest exporter of timber and oil through Chittagong. But now imagine the neck, that you got, and so infrastructure is not merely about growth. Infrastructure is also about equity. And infrastructure is also about inclusion. And you take the same thing about rural roads. What does it do? What does it enable you to do? It enables the village folk to come and work in urban centers on whatever job they're doing, whether it's construction sites or retail, et cetera, and go back to where they're living. Now that's the model that you got to do. So we often look at infrastructure in a very sort of conservative economic GDP model. But so I'm pointing out to you 3 things. One, that infrastructure must have to be green, and that requires innovation of the order that you've not had before. And that requires innovation which is completely out of the box, and you've got to think through it. And just one example that I give you is that the Roorkee IIT, and in Roorkee there is one institute for, I forget now, but I think Railroad, IRR it's called. Anyway, they are testing at the moment a new form of concrete, which requires 1/10 the amount of cement to be done, and has got the tensile power, which is n fact times of that present concrete. If you reduce that amount of concrete that goes into the buildings, and if you can use, for example, bamboo in place of wood that you've got, you get a different type of infrastructure going forward. Or, for example, you use the plastic nuggets in your road construction, which has already happened, or you use biofuels for your energy. Now, that innovation has to be scaled up multifold in India for us to be able to do achieve the kind of goals that we have. So that's one. Two, I'm talking to you about the fact that the infrastructure is essential condition for private enterprise and private investment to take off, because that's the constraint that they're faced all the time, very often. And our country is so huge. It's a double landlocked state from Punjab to Rajasthan and Gujarat, and then how would they do it? And by the way, I didn't include airports and seaports, and that's also a part of infrastructure, so that if you get airports into Punjab, which can carry freight out, then they can export high-value items from there. So that's the second one. And the third one is that infrastructure is important and necessary for equitable development of your country, which is as diverse and as large as it is today. So I think I've run out of my time. I'll take up questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. Now, may I please invite Shweta Punj, Deputy Editor, Money Control, to please moderate the session.
Thank you, Meghna. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. Always very insightful to hear you. And I've always believed that there are very few people who truly understand how the Indian economy works, the nuts and bolts of it, and you are one of those few people. You have been a policy maker. You were with Niti Aayog. I remember you when you were heading CPR. So you have seen how policies are formed and how they get implemented. I want you to walk down your memory lane for a little bit and help us understand this government's approach towards infrastructure. Since you were part of the team which probably laid out the blueprint for what we see today, how different is it from our earlier governments? What is the focus area that the government is trying to accomplish through this concerted push towards infrastructure creation?
Yeah, so Shweta, I think the principal sort of feature of this government's approach is that Indian enterprise, Indian companies should not face the logistics deficit that they have faced perennially. And that because that makes them globally uncompetitive. And that's the key of it. I mean, that's where it starts. And therefore, a special department in the Ministry of Commerce, looking at logistics. That is why the Gati Shakti, that is why the 100 trillion rupees push and allocation and target for that. Now, and the other part, and which is, by the way, this is a critical, very big part, and combined that is with delivery. So not just plans on paper, but then you've got to achieve that, and this is where Mr. Gadkari's contribution is just amazing. And I think now Mr. Vaishnav's contribution will also be equally amazing. And again, we don't normally talk about telecom as infrastructure, but that's also because I slipped up in it because very often I think we should talk about infrastructure as improving connectivity. And once you do that, you bring in telecom, digital already in it. And that, I think, should be the focus. But very often, infrastructure gets, as we've said, as I've slipped up into railways, highways, and so on. Sure. And I'm sure Mr. Ashwani Vaishnav's lead in having this huge 2.5 lakh crore investment into railways, never been done before. And that's again, so the other aspect of the feature of this approach is that we will go multimodal. We will not do only one kind of, infrastructure development. We will do all that's possible. So in the Northeast, we'll get airports first because that's the way to, to take the goods and people out of there. So number of airports has gone up, I think, 3 times or something like that.
Right.
We will do waterways to reduce our cost and make it greener. And that's a little bit, and multimodal because, and waterways, the development is critical, is quite sort of complex, because you've got to connect the waterways with your existing infrastructure of railways and roadways and so on. And multimodal, as I said, and so highways, railways, all of it, and then interconnected, with each other. So that's the other big approach. And I think and then finally, I think the approach is that that's a part that hinterland development, connecting your export, hubs to the hinterland, and which is and maybe laying special railway lines on that, to get the outage going, etc. I think those are the three. And as I said, and all that I said was also part of government's approach, because innovation is a part of it, equity, northeast development, and rural roads, which have again increased huge numbers. So that's that in my view. And then clearly long-term targets.
Right.
So we got to go there. So not just short-term, and hopefully, and Prime Minister is very clear that short-term political agenda does not and will not interfere into this infrastructure development.
Right. So, the foundation for this infrastructure push was laid long time ago when Mr. Vajpayee conceived and executed the Golden Quadrilateral project. And then, of course, Mr. Modi has carried that forward in terms of increasing spending, in terms of having a vision of this multimodal connectivity. The one thing that we saw with the Golden Quadrilateral project was that while it connected the big cities, it's the rural areas that got left out. So I just want to go back to what you just said, that infrastructure creation needs to be green, it needs to lead to equitable growth. So the kind of infrastructure creation that we see currently, if you were to break down for us, how will it play out in the economy, the economic impact of it? That would be, I think, very helpful for us to understand the clear impact of what we are witnessing around us.
Yeah. By the way, it's quite amazing and credible that even The Economist has taken note of this in the latest issue.
Yes, yes.
India on the Move is the article, and so it's talking about that India, like China, is now pushing. So, so the government must have done something right for that to happen. And that government getting it right is basically that the capex required for this infrastructure development has always been, for times immemorial, a public sector capex, because these are the general, these are the basic conditions for production. And the way it improves economic prospects is, one, it itself creates value and generates jobs. That's the first part. The second part is that I don't have the numbers exactly, but the multiplier effect of this is very large. And I think in a common sense way, you can think of, if you construct highways and the amount, all infrastructure is supposed to have about 200 backward linkages, that going backward. So
200.
All sorts of sectors get. So that's the second, the multiplier, and therefore the economy-wide impact of it, including in employment generation. The third is, of course, the ease of doing business. So if you get good highways and railways, and you get electronic tolls, etc., the movement of goods and people, if you like, become, especially goods, I think that's very important. And I think this is where we need to focus much more on, because the economy's competitiveness, the economy's growth potential is much more dependent on an easier, faster, less expensive movement of goods and services, if you like, because through the digital economy. And that's the third one, which is very important. And the fourth, as I said, is that when you get the rural infrastructure in place, then again you can have economic development, which is very different from that which has happened in Asia and otherwise, that you can't possibly create 20 million kind of population cities in India and hope to take it forward. You've got to expand it, but in an efficient manner, not increasing costs. And that's what, again, the rural infrastructure can do. But in this sense, the very important part of that is played by the digital economy. Because now with the new era, as you've seen in COVID, etc., the availability of the bandwidth, and therefore the 5G and so on, and will become maybe as or even more critical than the physical infrastructure that we normally think about. And the other part of it, which is again not talking about, is the boost it gives to tourism. And because India doesn't attract as much foreign tourists as our potential is. Our potential is absolutely huge. And that's very often because of poor infrastructure, facilities and connectivity that you need to go to. All of this, so, I mean, in one word, the impact of the infrastructure in the economy is just probably the biggest of all sectors and of all economic activity.
So at a time when economies across the world are cutting back spending, are bracing for a slowdown, would you say that our focus on infrastructure will act like a protective cover around India? Is this something that will keep the economy going?
No, not protective, but attractive.
Attractive.
Because we will be able to attract the investment that is required. Because of the better infrastructure. People, and the India story, which is already rather strong, quite strong abroad, will become stronger. The people will find that there are many more opportunities, locations, geographies where they can come and invest. So in this world where, and that will then lead to India becoming a major driver of global growth as China slows down and as the West, as the OECD countries continue to kind of stagnate at very low levels of growth. The baton for global growth would come over to India because of this infrastructure and, as I said earlier, of education and skills. The two combined can make India the propeller of global growth in the next 25 years.
So, considering this is the year of India's G20 presidency, like you said, India is one of the most attractive countries to the world. Would you say that this is India's moment? And also this is a pre-election year. So we don't want to slow down, and the government is focusing on creating jobs through infrastructure creation to ensure that the economy keeps running and keeps firing on all cylinders. So if you were to take a macro view, if you were to zoom out and see India right now in the context of what's happening in China, what's happening in the US, what's happening in the European economy, how would you rate and rank India's economy?
Let me repeat the cliche, which is that we are the fastest growing, largest economy in the world, and we will remain so for times to come. I think this afternoon we're talking about this. And somebody was asking me, why do you say it's India's moment in global economic history? But I don't need to, detail that. But both, for the first time, I think, the global conditions are in sync with the domestic conditions, and they're both propitious. India, whether it's friendshoring or it is de-risking the national risk in China, yes, there is a Vietnam, etc., but there are not too many Vietnam that offer an alternative to the India investment scenario. So, and the domestic policy is also, geared completely towards this. So I think this is where I feel is that, and which is the basis of my optimism of our 8% rate of growth of GDP comes from there. So okay, it will not be achieved in FY24, and because of the COVID and other things that our rate of growth is going down, but has gone down to a certain extent. But I'm confident, actually confident, that given all that's happened here, and given the global situation, India growth rate, and that's the macro picture, that we will be the epicenter of global growth for the next 2.5 decades, or even longer.
Wow.
By the way, and because also of our demography, if we can convert our young population into employable, skilled people, and which the national education policy is very, very focused on.
Right.
But we need to do much more because in that, then you got infrastructure, you got energy, and you got skills. I think it's good going.
So we've got all the essential ingredients.
Yeah, and our entrepreneurship is actually
Absolutely.
is world famous for a very long time. I mean, by the way, I'm sure everybody knows here that Angus Madison's work, which
Right.
said that in first century AD, we were more than 30% of the world economy and 16% of our world population, which is why young Alexander came looking for us.
Right.
Now, so and that was all private driven. And this is my firm belief, and I said this many times in Niti Aayog, is that India will grow only and only if the private entrepreneurship and private investor and private businesses get the necessary push or just the conditions for growth. And because that's happening, much more, as I said, hard work, not complacent at all.
Right.
I said, therefore, we need to work very hard. We need to go out of the box. We need to think about, not just the top 5,000 companies or 3,000 companies, but the whole depth of our private enterprise, and make credit and technology and market accessible, etc. But the process is on. So I can go into detail, but this government is clearly aligned to this view.
Right.
That it is the private sector which will make India's story happen.
Okay.
And let's do whatever we can to do so.
But over the last decade, if we look at the data, private investment has not kept pace. In fact, it's fallen. So what is it that's holding the private industry back from investing?
I'm not sure about the answer. Because it's, we have had, anyway, the COVID is just part of it, but maybe a degree of uncertainty in the private investor's mind about how policy, and one of the things is, I hope I'm not, let me put it, if all policy changes would happen prospectively and don't have a retroactive feature to that, the private investment would feel far more secure and less uncertain about the future of his or her, prospects of his or her investment. I think that's, and the other part of it is, of course, that, the introduction of the GST, etc., has changed the climate for the small and medium enterprises, which have got to learn to get into this, new regime, and that's happening. And as that happens, basically, I'm talking about the formalization of the informal economy, because
Sure.
that informal and that the process has begun, and as we get more integrated into it, then our supply chains will become longer. And our smaller guys will also become part of not just the domestic, but also the regional and global production networks and global supply chains. And that change, that regime change, is perhaps one of the reasons for which you are seeing not, and I would say not yet, the much more, buoyant response. But I'm convinced that it will happen, and because of all the liberalization that's taken place. So let's. Yeah.
So do you see the tide turning soon, though?
Sorry?
Do you see the tide turning soon in terms of private investment? Do you see the
Yeah,
sun?
I think so. I think very much so, and both foreign and domestic investor will recognize very soon that this government's clear intention is to help it, along and is to promote it. And the PLI scheme is the best example of this. And I'm not sure what the latest numbers are, about how much investment has been attracted into those 13 sectors, but I believe it's quite significant. And the fact that you've got
Especially in the electronic space, yeah.
electronic, but also another, I'm told that steel and electric vehicles and battery storage batteries, etc., all textiles, now the recent announcement
Textiles, yes.
of the mega textile park. I think all of that, this is in the making, and there's a gestation period. But I'm sure that you will see that as we go forward, and if these 14 sectors, which are sunrise sectors,
Sure.
if they get up, get the capacity that we are planning to, with the $26 billion incentive, layout, I think things will change completely. By the way, the other thing that I wanted to say is that we don't look deep enough into our burgeoning services economy. The health and the education and the IT and the IT-enabled services, etc. That's now increasingly, much larger than it was before. And quite often we don't discuss the private investment that's happening there.
Sure.
One part, two, the startup, phenomena that's happened. The number of unicorns, they'll not compensate for the big established business, but that's the second one. That will take the thing forward, and finally the agricultural transformation. Agriculture employing nearly 50% of the workforce, producing only 18% of the GDP, shows the extent of backwardness. And there again, the government has really focused a huge amount now, into agriculture, agro-processing, precision agriculture, chemical-free agriculture, what we call natural farming, all of that. And I think again, this is, it's going to take time, but all the necessary conditions are there in place for private investment to happen.
Okay, well, we do hope that this comes true. My last question is on what we are witnessing in the U.S. The banking crisis. Somewhere we do get nightmares about what happened in 2008. Will we see a repeat? What kind of an impact should India brace itself for, considering what we are seeing in the United States? I wanted to get your thoughts in on that.
I do remember that 2008-9 crisis didn't affect Indian banking sector. The little hiccup, and I was on the board of the SBI at that time, was with the ICICI Bank, which had overexposed itself in its London branch, had overexposed itself, and the SBI moved in very quickly to cover that. And Mr. Y.V. Reddy took care of the fact that the Indian banking sector remained, in some sense, quite protected. I think the same scenario will play out now, because our banking sector is quite well regulated, but more importantly, very well capitalized. Our capital adequacy norm here is even higher than recommended by Basel norms. So I mean, all the large banks at least have more than 14, sometimes even 16% as capital adequacy norm, and therefore that gives them the resilience, to bear with this. And in any case, although the share has declined, the share of the public sector banks is still very large. Whether it's under assets under management or trade, etc. And that's backed by the government guarantee. So to that extent, it's explicit. And therefore, I doubt, not only just doubt, but I'm confident that the Indian banking sector, unlike the Indonesian or the Korean, etc., which were impacted by I don't think this US thing will impact us in a big way. Now, these can be very brave words, but who knows, after Credit Suisse and so on. Sure. But I feel quite confident that we've got our banking sector well covered. By the
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. Always a pleasure speaking with you. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thank you, Shweta and Dr. Kumar, for an insightful session. That was truly an eye-opening session. I would request Binoy to please present Dr. Kumar with a token of appreciation. Dr. Kumar, a big round of applause for him. Now let's straight away jump to this evening. Great. May I invite Rachita Prasad and Infrastructure to please call her panelists.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It was a very interesting start to the session, and we are only hoping that the momentum keeps going. Well, the line between disorder and order lies in logistics. Not my words. These are the words of Chinese strategist and General Sun Tzu, who wrote the book, The Art of War. And that tells you how important logistics is to the economy. India is setting up and building its infrastructure on war footing. And if that is the case, we also need to streamline our logistics sector, which is right now quite fragmented and very complex. Last year, the National Logistic Policy was announced, and it puts in place a framework which looks at the different components in the logistics industry that need to be streamlined. How far have we come and what more is required? That is something that has been on minds of everybody, and that is what we intend to discuss today. We have a very interesting set of people with us today who will talk about it. I'll welcome our panelist, Mr. Vijay Chhibber. Mr. Chhibber is the former Secretary of Roads and Highways. Currently, he's the, sorry, can you hear me? Mr. Chhibber, of course, is the inside man, and we are looking forward to some solid perspective from him. So, welcome to Moneycontrol's event. Next up, Mr. Geoffrey Thomas. Mr. Thomas is partner at PwC, and he tracks the transport and logistics sector very closely. He's always in touch with the ministers and, of course, the private sector. So we hope to hear some interesting anecdotes from him as well. Next up, Kanika Tekriwal, founder and CEO of JetSetGo, who has literally she just flew in just in time to attend this, so glad that she's been able to join us. And finally, we have Rishi Agarwal, co-founder and CEO of Teamlease, the man everybody looks to for compliance issues. So please welcome our panelists before we start the session. So interesting session there on Gati Shakti and generally what's happening in the infra space. But, you know, when we are looking at the infrastructure sector, there are lots of, balls up in the air right now, especially in the logistics space. Let's start with Geoffrey. Geoffrey, you are in touch with the private sector and you are also in touch with the government. Tell me, in terms of the policy per se, do you think everything is in place? Because NLP has set the framework, and it has some very ambitious goals that it wants to achieve in terms of how it wants to improve the ease of doing business, brings down the cost. So is at least all the bases covered?
So I'll continue from where possibly Rajiv ji also touched upon in the last session very clearly. And when it comes to road infrastructure and rail infrastructure, pure say, I think over the last 2 to 3 years, there's significant investment and development that's happened. There's more in the pipeline as well. So from a pure trunk infrastructure connectivity perspective, I think we're in a good place. However, the couple of areas which will require, from a policy perspective, significant push is, one, the whole development of meaningful multimodal terminals, which essentially create as windows into the network of road and rail that you have. So without those efficient terminals, cargo will not be able to efficiently access either of these trunk infrastructures that get developed all over the country. So I think that's one area where I would at least love to see more policy push. The second area, purely from a rail freight transportation perspective, I think after many decades, we are in a situation where rail trunk infrastructure capacity is going to be surplus in certain regions. Right. We've always been a supply deficit rail country for a very, very long time. So as we move to enough supply being created, there is an entire switch in mindset on the commercial side which is required to accompany that change. Because it's a whole transition from a supply deficit to a supply surplus space. That's the second area where I think there would be a lot of policy support which would be required, so that we are able to make the most of all of this infrastructure investments that are being made.
Interesting, and some very valid points there. Kanika, for those of you who don't know, I mean, her company did a fabulous job during the pandemic, providing on-demand cargo to transport vaccines, to transport oxygen cylinders. But from an industry point of view, when you look at the policy, are there any gaps that you think need to be filled?
I think it's an excellent initiative. The entire NLP by itself is, above and beyond what most people in the industry would imagine. But having said that, I think, my biggest, the biggest shortcoming I oversee is, I don't think we've emphasized or focused enough on air infrastructure. And simply because, today India being the geography that it is, we've got 60% dependency on roads currently. We've got excellent road infrastructure being created, and which is already existent and is being created. But at the same time, I think, we don't have pure air cargo airports. You don't have air cargo airports close to ports. So you ultimately, you're feeding in cargo. Your whole policy has been created to give a push towards exports, to streamline the whole export-import procedure, right? But at the end of the day, when you've got cargo filling up at ports, I think the ideal thing to do would be have pure cargo, simple terminals at these ports to feed into the inner areas of India. Our biggest learning during the pandemic was that how do you transport goods fast and very quickly to far-flung areas like Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, the northeast belt especially in the country, right? And that's where we stepped in. We converted 8-seater planes into cargo planes quite literally, and we filled them with something as basic as masks and got them in. And I think, pulling in from that learning, we need to prepare to move cargo faster. And I think that's the key to ultimately reducing cost also. So I think this is one gap that I see. And the other thing I see, which I don't see covered very well in the policy, is that we have to also see the whole system of imports into the country. At the end of the day today, when you have to custom clear goods, I'll give you a live example. Today as a company, when we have a component or a part fail, and you import the part, most industrialists, most manufacturing units need parts imported again. When you have to change that part and you're in an AOG situation, you're in an emergency situation, it takes almost anywhere between 24 hours to 3 days to clear that part at the customs terminal. You need a customs clearance agent, a cargo agent, etc. Vis-a-vis, it should be very simple. Anyone like us should be able to go online, pay the fees, go collect your part and get out. So I think, we need to go into not only the macro bits, but also the micro bits to simplify and achieve what are very easily achievable goals, according to me. We have a lot of airstrips that are not utilized, that are not fit for commercial transportation due to the lack of passenger movements. Those airstrips can very easily be converted into, cargo air terminals purely, and also enable a framework to encourage more air cargo airlines into the country. You don't have too many air cargo operators operating in the country. And you look at the job Amazon Prime is doing in the US. Why can't we have that in India at the end of the day?
That's interesting, of course. If Amazon can do it, why can't we do it, right? Ms. Chhibber, you are the inside man here. You understand what goes into the making of a policy. Now, when we look at the logistics space, there's a sort of duality of issues that is very inherent to the sector. For example, there is the physical infrastructure and there is the digital infrastructure. We need to work on both. Then there is the state and the center issue. Of course, there's a whole story altogether. So when we look at the policy itself, what are the biggest challenges that the government will face now? And in your opinion, do you think the policy accommodates all these dualities of issues that we are talking about? I'm saying the duality of these issues, like center versus state, or digital and the physical infra. Do you think it addresses all the issues?
Yeah, so thank you. when we look at what are the challenges, actually we need to look at the ingredients of a logistics framework. And to be fair, we have so far been looking at more, as you mentioned, the physical infrastructure, and now because of the logistics policy, the digital space. So I think there has been a huge amount of effort, particularly in terms of the physical infrastructure. One could even call it a transformative kind of a change. Whether it's the roads in terms of Bharatmala and other schemes, or whether it's the ports in terms of the Sagarmala initiative, the railways in terms of the dedicated freight corridors, port facilitation in the form of direct port delivery and direct port entry, and more recently in the last 2-3 years, particularly the huge efforts being made in inland waterways and coastal shipping. So I think in the physical space there is enough effort being done. Echoing these efforts at the federal government level, I think several state governments, and I must draw pointed attention, because somehow we, sitting in Delhi, we sometimes feel it is only the Bharat Sarkar which is doing a lot. But a lot of state governments have taken huge strides in physical infrastructure. States like Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, Karnataka, down south, a lot of states, they have done tremendous work, whether it's in the road sector, in the port sector, etc. So, I mean, in the physical space, a lot is happening. The recently announced Gati Shakti program, now this is actually a game changer. This is actually a game changer. This provides a dynamic master planning tool for both project design and monitoring. It is currently available substantially for Government of India ministries and agencies. State governments are being now roped in, and over time I'm sure some amount of sharing with the private sector will also have to happen. This is so because a large amount of infrastructure is currently being developed through the private sector. So while there would be some sensitive areas under the Gati Shakti initiative which are not easily available or will not be provided to private sector, I'm sure this will follow through. The national logistics policy is broadly covering all the requirements in the digital space. And I think Mr. Agarwal will probably have more to add on that. Broadly, they have covered all that is required in terms of the integrated digital systems, the unified logistics interface, ease of logistics, etc. So now the question to be asked is whether what we have done is adequate. So while these are essential ingredients, are they sufficient in terms of taking our logistics to the next level? And I firmly believe that they are not sufficient. They are not sufficient for two broad reasons. One is, of course, that logistics is not something to be done just by the Bharat Sarkar and a few state governments. There are umpteen number of stakeholders, including the private sector. And the vast range of stakeholders requires a more holistic approach if we are to make a meaningful change in our current position of 26, if I recall correctly, in the index of logistics framework. If we are to make a meaningful change, come down from the 14-15% of costs, logistic costs in India today, to something closer to what the developing world has, which is around 8 or 9%. So I think that missing link is the involvement of all stakeholders, and this cannot happen if we continue with this segmented and verticals approach. What is required, in my view, is the need for an institutional framework which is dedicated and focused on this task. It has the mandate of the government, in fact the Prime Minister, if I may say so, and is capable of reaching out on a sustained basis. Unless we have this, I think this will be an effort in the making. I just want to draw one attention, because there are several studies which have talked exactly on this, the challenges of infrastructure. I'll draw your attention to one, I thought, very good study which was done by the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. This was in December of 2018. it sounds dated, but I was going through it. Its prescription is still absolutely valid. And one of the key takeaways from that is the need for an institutional framework to be established like yesterday. And that is 2018. We are in 23 and no further steps have been taken. So I rest my case on that. Yeah.
Much can be said about the pace, but the good news is at least things are moving. So when we are looking at how things are moving, and you quoted a very interesting report. Rishi has worked on another very interesting report about a year back, the topic being jailed for doing business, about how companies are, the compliance issues are so complex that it makes things difficult for companies. Now, we see companies, we see people like Kanika who are hungry for more. They want everything yesterday. And we also see policy like, for example, what Mr. Chhibber said, that the report was there, it's been there, but nothing really has happened on that. When we talk about ease of doing business, which is at the center of all this after all, so how far are we from making that a reality? And given the context of the national logistics policy, really, how tough is it going to be?
Well, an interesting question, Rachita, and thanks for bringing that up. Let me start from the very basics, right? If you go by the macro numbers, and Dr. Kumar has quoted a lot of numbers, so I refrain from getting into too details of numbers, but it has taken us 75 years post-independence, 1.4 billion Indians to cross the GDP of 66 million Britishers. If you dissect that, it's a very powerful narrative out there. If you dissect that, one of the key root causes will be entrenched hostility, mistrust, and regulatory cholesterol that ails entrepreneurs in India. There are 4 factors of production, we all know that: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Regulatory cholesterol has thwarted entrepreneurship. Dr. Kumar spoke about private entrepreneurship for the last 70, 75 plus years. If you look at some more data there, Indian entrepreneurs deal with 1,536 acts. Subsumed in them are 69,233 compliances. Within them are 6,618 filings. And hold your breath, 26,134, which is 37% of them, carry jail term. You could potentially go to jail for failing to whitewash the inner walls of latrines once every 3 months and maintaining a record for that, and the jail term goes up to about 2 to 3 years. The jail term for not maintaining the medical record of a cook in the factory's kitchen can go anywhere from 1 to 3 years. If you look at proportionality, if you look at this entrenched hostility, the answer is very clear as to why India is where it is in terms of promoting private entrepreneurship. When you talk about logistics, and today's discussion is on logistics, so I'll quickly come to logistics. One of the key areas within logistics is setting up warehouses. And we are talking about cold chains, we are talking about refrigerated vehicles, we are talking about warehouses of all kinds. There's a regulator for that and so on. Did you know that if a single entity operating in a single state wants to start a single warehouse, it deals with about 35 minimum licenses and over 650 compliances in a year. Now, if this warehouse is a cold chain, if it also stores food, this number can go up to 750 or 800 compliances. Now, if somebody wants to actually create a business of warehouses, and they want to do 10, 15 different warehouses, which is a normal thing to do, imagine the number of compliances they're dealing with. So I think ease of doing business, regulatory cholesterol alleviation are areas which need to be integral to any dialogue around national logistics policy and so on and so forth, in absence of which we will not go to our logical destiny.
The numbers are making me sweat. I'm just grateful to God that I didn't choose to get into business like Kanika. I'm happy with my salary. Anyway, so, the interesting thing that's, every time I'm talking to people on NLP is that a lot of interpretation that is being done by the center and the state seems to be a little different. Mr. Chhibber did name a few states which have moved very swiftly on this, but there is a little bit of ambiguity on that. In terms of, just the sheer complexity of the industry, when we look at the space, I mean, I would like to ask you, Jaffrey, I mean, in terms of what would be your suggestions to the government to kind of streamline all that? Like, for example, even the data from all the ministries have not been, fed into the system till now. I mean, there's a challenge even between the ministries to get all the data on one platform. If you're talking about a single window clearance, there again, there are a lot of problems, lot of complexities. In fact, I was talking to somebody and I said, it will make your life easier. And he's turned around and he said that, I don't know, because now I'm dealing with a faceless concept. Earlier, I could just talk to him and negotiate and get an approval. If I can talk to the custom officers. Now I won't have that access. What is your opinion on what can the government do to kind of expedite this?
Without mincing words, I think I am a strong believer that at least the ULIP initiative within the National Logistics Policy is both real, it's gaining momentum, and it is significantly beneficial as well for trade. It's also from a timing perspective, aptly there, I would say, both from the perspective of increasingly supply chains from India getting integrated into global supply chains, the frequency of disruptions across supply chains increasing now, and the coming of life of 5G. With all of that, actually this data becoming available on one platform brings significant opportunities for everyone. Completely agree with you that yes, all the required data, for example, the e-way bill data is still not integrated into ULIP. Even some of the databases that are available, you have very limited data sets which have been made available. Right. So, for example, on the railway data, you have about 8 parameters which are covered. A host of about 90 plus are still not covered in that sense. So there's a lot more to be integrated, but that's the easier part, I believe. You've got the platform running, right? You've got the back-end data integrating, right? It's now about the process of bringing that more and more data onto the platform. You also have about 88 use cases from the private sector already accessing those data through APIs and creating softwares or intelligence of their own on top of that, right? So even that part of the puzzle has started solving for itself, right? As we get more data, and this is really a scale game, right? The more data you make available on the platform, and that's the only expectation from the government there, is to have that data more seamlessly available, and so that these use cases can all multiply, and sooner we'll have most organizations in the country using that data, which will also make, not to a large extent, the degree of compliances that you mentioned, but at least some compliances that you require will become a lot more easier with that digital integration. Right. For example, with Sarthi and Vahan being integrated, some part of your compliance on transport has already become easier with the database coming in. A lot more of that will come in the future.
That's interesting. I mean, Mr. Chhibber, what is your take? Same question for you. I mean, what more can the government do to kind of streamline things and expedite the whole process as such?
So, without belittling the efforts we have made, I mean, there's been huge effort which has taken place, and he just mentioned some, and Rishi also did mention some. I think my difficulty is at a conceptual level. Somehow we are thinking that getting our logistics framework right is like a one-time effort. If you build this room, we've got over the hill. No, logistics is an evolving challenge. Every year, new technologies, new transportation models, new global standards would be put in place. So, logistics is not something cast in stone. It is completely evolving, and therefore response also has to be dynamic and similarly evolving. So for that, you need to put in place a very empowered and a dedicated institution. And for example, you take the US model, which is of course not the best. They are still around 11% at logistics cost, vis-a-vis 8 to 9% in Europe. But having said that, they have tried to address this issue through integrating all transport systems under the Department of Transport. So there's a convergence of sorts. Whereas we continue to work in silos. We have a Department of Railways, we have a Department of Roads, we have a Department of Shipping. So where does it get us? Today, despite the huge improvements that have happened in the railways, particularly in the last 2-3 years, the share of railways in total cargo transportation is 27%. Now, we should have at least by now achieved a level of 50-55%, whereas road transport is carrying 73%. Completely unacceptable. It cannot be that anybody's case that the road transport is more efficient in terms of logistic costs. The country has a huge coastline. The country has huge rivers which were being used as transport corridors. And logically, coastal shipping and inland waterways should have been about, the share in transportation should have been about 20-22%. Where are we in terms of actual figures? It's about 2 or 3%. So this segmented approach is not going to get us very far. I therefore come back to my earlier theme. We just need to focus on setting up a empowered group or a vertical. I mean, I haven't thought through the shape of this agency that I am alluding to. It could be a body under the Cabinet Secretariat with all the backing of government. It could be a dedicated wing in the Niti Aayog. It could be on the lines of the GST Council. But we jolly well need to find an agency which is going to work on improving logistics day in and day out in partnership with state governments, because without state governments, you're not getting anywhere. I don't know if you, just on a lighter plane, we have the happy hour when we stay in a hotel. Do you know what the happy hour on the highway is? The happy hour is, say, typically between 8 or 9, sometime 15-20 minutes. The local SHO corrals together all the trucks that he can in the previous 3 hours. And for that happy hour, every truck that goes through does not pay the toll tax. But that toll tax is collected by agents of this, either the transport department or the police department. So now this is the reality on ground. And we are talking at one level, we are going digital, we are going huge physical infrastructure. But getting efficiencies in logistics, every piece of this puzzle needs to be cracked. And you need dedicated teams working with state governments. Without fully integrating and involving state governments, I don't think we'll be able to crack this puzzle. If I can take just 1 minute. Why I'm wanting to emphasize this institutional part is, I'll do it through an analogy. When we've been talking about road safety, for example, for the last 2 decades. But certainly, Mr. Gadkari, since he came, he's been talking about road safety in a very, very upfront and an aggressive manner. One would have imagined that we would have made some major strides. In 2014, we drafted the road safety bill, and we put it to government. At that point in time, the accidents, road accidents that were recorded in our data was ranging between 5 to 5.5 lakhs. Fatalities around 1.5 lakhs, and injuries leading to morbidity about 3.5 lakhs. Next year, we went for the Brazil conference, which was a global conference. In the Brasilia Declaration, we committed India to reducing these numbers by 50% by 2021. If you see the figures of 2022 and 2023, we are exactly where we were in 2014. Now, it's not for want of, it's not for lack of realization of how important this is, but we do not have an agency which is working in a sustained manner and using all the scientific tools that are available to crack this piece.
Very interesting point by Mr. Chhibber that, there is a lack of an agency to kind of consolidate all that is being done. But enough of what the government can do. What is the private sector doing to align itself to all these dramatic changes that we are talking about? Kanika and Rishi, both of you, I would like your quick view on that.
Sure, well, it's very simple, right? What can government do unless private sector brings its shoulder to the load in an expedited adoption model? Government went and created a fantastic FASTag infrastructure to streamline the flow of traffic at toll plazas. If private sector is not going to embrace it and ensure that that technology is adopted quickly and this whole initiative moves forward at a rapid pace, this initiative is only going to take much longer to bear fruits. Now, whether it is a FASTag infrastructure or an e-way infrastructure, e-way online system which has streamlined the way some of this happens, or you talk about the GST which has changed the way, I mean, it is often not stated in terms of the kind of efficiency gains that logistics has seen because of introduction of GST and the number of extra kilometers that trucks can cover because they don't have to stop at every state at the entry points and get their documents checked and stuff like that. So private sector has to make sure it does not drag its feet and it adopts these technological changes, process changes, and helps in an expedited adoption and implementation.
Fair enough. Kanika, for once I think we are doing ladies last.
I know we're short on time, so I'll keep it quick, but I couldn't agree with him more. And I think it's very important for the private sector to do honest, ethical business. And I think that's the key word here, because if you're not going to support the government's initiatives for self-benefit, the country's never going to progress. We've got to look at the overall picture, and I think the government's doing more than it can possibly to enable entrepreneurs such as myself and enable large organizations. And the only way we can give back is by being honest, ethical, not doing things that benefit us and not benefit the country. And I think the other thing that's also very important, especially in the logistics spaces, there is a lot of technological change that's taking place on a day-to-day basis, and especially with the new policy, if you see, there's a lot of push and focus on the using of technology. And I think it's very important for the private sector to train, enable, and make your grassroots level staff also understand how to implement and use this technology for it to actually work and go ahead.
Fabulous. So we had a very interesting discussion, and I think this may be a good time to wrap it up, because as much as we need the government to expedite the policy and push the execution, I think what Kanika and Rishi said also really, that the private sector cannot be dragging its feet. I mean, they need to be ahead of the curve and probably create more challenges for the government to address. Right. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would request to please stay on the stage. Binoy, I'd request you to please present a token of appreciation to all the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for all the panelists. With that, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to welcome our next guest, an industry veteran, someone who has played a transformative role in putting India's automotive industry on the world map. Please welcome Mr. R.C. Bhargava, the chairman of Maruti. And to moderate the session, may I please invite Moneycontrol Deputy Executive Editor, Mr. Ravi Krishnan, on stage.
Good evening, everyone. If anyone could truly be said to work at the intersection of government and industry, it is Mr. Bhargava. He was an IAS officer, then worked with a private sector company, with a public sector company, which was what Maruti was at its inception. And now, of course, it's a private sector company, which is majority owned by a Japanese corporation. He's been at the inception of Maruti, more than 40 years ago, and now he's again leading the company when the whole auto industry is pivoting towards a future which we don't know what it is yet, electric vehicles or hybrid. Thanks, Mr. Bhargava, for joining us, for taking the time out. Thanks. So, Mr. Bhargava, one question which I noticed both, you know, the two earlier panels which were also discussing, which I wanted to ask you also, is the reluctance of private sector, you know, to invest. The economic survey this year, you know, it pointed out that India missed the manufacturing bus because of a lack of physical and digital infrastructure. It was in the earlier decades, but now we are seeing this big push. Yeah. But still, the government has not succeeded in crowding in private sector investment. Why is it so?
Well, investments are not on the basis of any one single factor. I think if we at any time thought that it was just the lack of infrastructure or infrastructure problems which were holding up investments, I think that was a wrong analysis of the problem. For a long time, we have always blamed the government for lack of growth of industry and manufacturing competitiveness. In the last 9 years, a very large number of reforms and changes have taken place, which, compared to what I know of what we worked under conditions in manufacturing some 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, it's like paradise today in those terms. It's changed so much. Yet, as everybody knows, manufacturing growth has not picked up.
Yeah, it's still only 13 to 15%.
The conclusion can't be that it was just infrastructure. I think there are other factors which are coming in the way, and those factors relate to the role which the private sector has to play in this matter. Government can go only that far. It's not government's job to make competitive manufacturing in any country. It can't be. It has to be the managements of industry which do it. And I think the question we need to ask is that is the management doing everything which is possible to make it competitive? Of course, it requires infrastructure. It requires that market should be growing, demand should be growing, which means GDP should be growing. All of those things are required. But given those things, is manufacturing doing everything to make it as competitive as possible?
So why is it not going? I mean, why is it not happening? Because the enabling factors are there. So what is not happening?
It's a very complex subject, and I think different people have different views. I have a very clear view on this. And my view is that if you look at countries which have grown rapidly in the manufacturing sector and become almost the leaders of the world in terms of manufacturing, which are those countries in the last 5-6 decades? Japan. Japan I'm quoting specially because it was the first country which, after the war, from nothing at all, it was a ruined, devastated country. It doesn't have raw materials, it doesn't have energy sources. In it, it became the most competitive manufacturing country in the world. It became a manufacturing country under a democratic system. I'm mentioning democratic system because we also have a democratic system. And when we talk about some other countries, we say, oh, but they are different, they are smaller, they have different political system and all that. But Japan did it under a democratic system. So, and it's not a small country. In fact, in terms of population density, in terms of the livable area, it's very, very densely populated. So Japan did it.
So what are the lessons from Japan? I mean, how can
why did
Indian
Japan do it? How many people in India, I wonder, have ever studied or really understood why Japan became so competitive? Why is the Japanese competitiveness not taught in our IIMs? Why don't we use that as a manufacturing case study to be studied as to why did Japan become so competitive, more competitive than the country which gave it technology? The US gave it technology.
But just in time and Six Sigma, those kind of concepts are taught.
Sorry?
concepts like just-in-time, which people believe are
It's
Japanese.
not only just in time. I think, our concept of Japanese competitors, they did just in time. What is just in time and how does just in time work? And is just in time all that there is? Certainly not. And that is what I'm saying. There's absolute lack of knowledge. For some reason, we have continued to look towards the West for manufacturing systems, manufacturing know-how, and everything. And knowing that over this period after the war, the Western countries have gradually all lost manufacturing competitiveness. All the competitiveness and manufacturing industry has shifted to the Eastern countries. Japan, China, Korea, they've all become the manufacturing giants of the world today. I don't quote China because it's not a democratic system. So we can't say that we can follow what China did. Korea is a little bit of a mix. You can't quite quote Korea. It's not like our system really, but Japan is. And why I'm quoting Japan is that if you look at India, the one company which followed the Japanese system right from the beginning, that is in 1983 onwards, was the company I was in, Maruti. And what has been the result? As a manufacturing company, Maruti became, I would venture to say, probably in the top manufacturing companies in India. You'll hardly find any company in the manufacturing sector which is as competitive as Maruti is. So the same system in Japan, which made Japan so competitive, made it competitive here. But in India, we are not doing it.
So you're saying it boils down to attitude?
I think it's a question of mindset. It's a question of a mindset which developed because of the license Raj and all that the license Raj brought into country. Our industrialists, private sector industrialists were perfectly, okay, let me use the word ethical, before 1950. We had some huge industrial giants in those days. Mr. Tata started, and Mr. Vishweshwari, and so many other people who were there who started industry, and they were patriotic, they were ethical, they built industries despite being under British rule. What happened after 1950 because of the industrial system, the competitive political system, political funding, created a very different attitude and working system in industry. Unfortunately, the lure of that kind of system has become so strong because the Japanese system or the system we followed in Maruti, which is similar to Jazz, cannot work if you follow all the benefits which you get under the system which developed after 1950. And people are unwilling to change.
So, I mean, what would be the biggest, characteristics of this system you're talking about?
One of the biggest characteristics, I would say, is that this system which we have, most of our industry is owner-managed. A large percentage of industry in India is owner-managed. People put up industry primarily for the purpose of creating a livelihood for themselves and their family and leading a better quality of life and upgrading their status in society by that industry. They do not operate an industry with the sole motive that I must grow the industry, and along with the growth of industry, all the stakeholders who are connected to the industry must also grow and benefit. That's one. The second is that in manufacturing industry, we have this belief that 60 to 70% of the employees of a manufacturing industry, who are the workers, have no contribution to make in the improvement of any process or any system or in the competitiveness of the company. All of that has to come from the top management, who are paid, therefore, 200, 300, 500 times what the worker is paid. And those people are just managed.
Sir, you're sounding like a socialist now. You're sounding like a socialist now when you're talking about socialist, when you're talking about top management salaries being high.
I'm very much a socialist. I think that if you want manufacturing industry to grow, what the Prime Minister is saying, what the government is saying, that manufacturing must be inclusive. Manufacturing cannot create, as it has created in the Western countries, a bigger and bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots. That is the reason why in 1950, we went for a large-scale public sector, because even then the government didn't want that wealth should be concentrated in a few hands. But the result has been quite different. And in future also, I think if we are going to become a manufacturing giant, we must listen to what the Prime Minister is saying and ensure that manufacturing is inclusive. Inclusive manufacturing requires that we believe that the workers are as capable of making improvements in the company because of the experience which they gain by working on different shop floors, that their capability of making improvements is as good as of any other employee in the company. And if they are making improvements in the company, they have a right to share some of the benefits of those improvements, which will mean inclusive growth.
Is this something which you are implementing at Maruti also?
That's right.
And so what kind of benefits have you seen?
Just as if I mentioned, all our workers except the trainee level people are all income taxpayers. 90% of them have their private cars. Lots of their children are now, because they've studied in the DPS school, which we put up as part of the system, they are now employed in multinationals, they are in consulting companies, they are everywhere because they've had the opportunity of good education. Good education is a fundamental requirement for upgrading people and inclusivity. But which industry provides good education for their workmen?
So you are saying that inclusion is a necessary condition for manufacturing to be cost competitive?
I'm saying that if you want to grow manufacturing, you must consider all your employees as equally valuable. You must create conditions that all of them can grow to their potential. Especially for the working class, you must give them all the opportunities we've not had all these decades in terms of being recognized for their contribution, in terms of their living, in their wages, their share of profits, their education, their housing. All of this you must look after as a proprietor or a manager of an industry.
Right. And one thing which we have seen is that, the auto sector itself has, has been the highest recipient of FDI. If you look at the last, say, 14, 15 years, the close second are drugs and pharma and specialty chemicals. So, sorry, can you hear me? Oh. So the auto sector has been the largest recipient of FDI over the last 14, 15 years, and a close second are drugs and pharmas and specialty chemicals. So if you were to look at it from the point of view of because you have worked closely with Osamu Suzuki in terms of what foreign investors want in terms of policy action, we all do say that, there is belief in the India growth story, but somehow it does not, translate to manufacturing gross value added going up.
See, FDI has come into many segments of India. It's not that FDI is not coming into India. We are a huge recipient.
But it is concentrated
but not
in a few
the
sectors.
Manufacturing sector.
Yes.
The only sector of manufacturing where there's a lot of FDI is actually the automobile sector. Because all the major car manufacturers of the world, General Motors, Ford, Renault, Nissan, Honda, everybody is invested in India. How much progress they've made is a different matter, but they've all invested in it. The reason they're not coming into India, partly earlier on it was the difficulty of doing business in India. And India had got a bad reputation that it's a very difficult country to do business in. There's so many rules, regulations, they can't do business here. Even when that has been simplified, people who come into India still think that they need an Indian partner to support them. The experience of Indian partners, by and large, has not been very satisfactory. And it has not been very satisfactory for the same reason that the approach and attitude of most Indian business houses and entrepreneurs and owners has not been in tune with what a foreign investor who's used to a different way of working wants. So foreigners still say that either we have to come into India on our own, and going by the past, Accenture 100% on their own in India. They want somebody to handhold them. But they can't find very many people to handhold who will be having the same kind of approach as they want.
So how do we solve for this problem?
I think it can only be solved, and I think it is getting solved to an extent. I think the younger generation today is much more in tune with what the Indian situation is. I think they are more willing to give up some of the value systems of the older generation of what they have got used to. I think the younger generation is much more practical, much more pragmatic. They're looking to see what will actually make things work here. If you see today, you will find a number of young people who have built up their companies, which are world-class companies. Right. It's not the older people who have done it.
Okay. So, shifting topics slightly, I want to talk about supply chains, global supply chains. So, friendshoring is a term that has come in vogue. China plus one is what people talk about, you know, where India has a large opportunity. And this has been going on for quite some time, you know, because people want to diversify away from China. But there has been mixed reports in terms of how successful India has been. We do have some, you know, success. Like, for example, Apple is manufacturing, you know, iPhones in India. A lot of specialty chemical companies are also, you know, made India their base as for imports. But it has still not become widespread. On which side of the debate are you? How do you see it?
No, the opportunity today is huge because, as you rightly said, people want to diversify from China. They want an alternative. A lot of investment is going into Vietnam. And if you read a little bit about Vietnam, you'll find how pragmatic they are in their approach and how people there are willing to, like I said, be totally participative in these things. So I think we need to look at our own people who will be partnering the foreign investments who come into India, and adopt a newer way of working with them where we look at the growth of the company as this main thing, where we think that the interests of all the stakeholders who are concerned with the company, whether it's the workers, whether it's the marketing people, whether it's the suppliers, everybody's interest should be looked after. And it should be, as we are talking these days, of inclusive growth. I think if that happens, it'll happen. Otherwise, it's very difficult for people to come in here as 100% owned investments. India is still not that easy a country where you can come as a foreigner, have mostly foreigners managing your labor and everything, and the rules and regulations, and still do a good business. You do need Indian participation.
I mean, interesting that you talk about Vietnam. So Vietnam, you know, has seen a rise in its share of manufacturing gross value added. But it was, in one sense, a satellite of China. One of the reasons why China grew was because it had a lot of regional support. The countries around it also, you know, it was a part of a whole ecosystem. But India, with the exception of Bangladesh, and that too in textiles to a certain extent, we don't have a regional support. I mean, SAARC, you know, that association is not talked about as a manufacturing powerhouse or as a destination for imports.
Yeah, but the difference is, in Vietnam, most of the management is in the hands of the foreigners who come and invest there. because it's a country where they let everybody, I mean, there's not that much of local requirements. India is a different country. I don't believe that very many foreigners working 100% with their own people can ever make a success in India. I think we have many things which are unique in this country, which are different from elsewhere. And I think we do require local, our Indian people, to work with the foreigners as partners, but with the sole intention of growing the company and benefiting all the stakeholders, not building an empire for themselves alone.
But do you think that is happening now?
I think it's beginning to happen. I think so.
Okay, and so, but how is it happening? In what sense are you saying?
If you look at the newer companies, younger generation people, I think they are much more willing to change from the old things. I think they're not so much taken up with that old thing that as long as my family and I are okay, then we are okay. There are people who want to build large industries for the sake of building large industries. One of our suppliers who started with us, a company called Motherson, his first factory started really when we started. First 4 or 5 factories, I inaugurated those factories. Today, he is a multinational with investments all over the world. India has now become a small part of his business. He's in the top world suppliers of auto components everywhere. He's supplying to everybody in the world. There are other people like him who are growing up. So these younger people are coming up. But I think the older generation will have to gradually step aside and let these younger people step in and do their work and build industry on the basis of size rather than a good family living.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you one question about electric vehicles. Electric vehicles, EVs. EVs are a hot topic, but you have said earlier that, EVs are an end to they are a means to an end, and which is decarbonization and sustainability. But in one sense, at least if you look at the Indian industry among homegrown Indian players, Maruti seems to be the only holdout, while others are all seeming, you have talked about ethanol and hybrid vehicles being a better option rather than EVs. But I mean, why is that? I mean, in the sense, isn't your focus getting diluted when you talk about other things?
No, I don't think that we are out of EVs at all. We are very much getting into EVs. We will be in EVs probably sometime next year or later part of next year. But EVs are not going to be the only answer for India. I think the policy makers need to understand that India is also different from most, in fact, from every other country in the world in many ways, and this is one of the ways. I think EVs are not the answer for us, for all users. India has options which other countries do not have. For example, the whole area of using bio-CNG, using the ability to use our waste materials to produce gas, and ideally suited for the smaller end of the market. We have, the minister is here, he has been saying for a long time, the use of ethanol. We must use that. We have the potential for use it. Why don't we use more of that? Brazil is doing it on a big scale. Why not in India?
But isn't there a danger that cash crops will get converted?
Use of this bio-CNG and use of ethanol, these will be not only net zero carbon emission. In fact, they will be negative in terms of carbon emission. Unlike electric vehicles, because they are using power generated using coal, they are a long way from being neutral in terms of the carbon emissions. So I think India has to have a mix of electric vehicles, vehicles using ethanol, vehicles using biogas, or this, what I'm talking of, CNG, bio-CNG and these things. We should be flexible and use all these sources of energy, not be taken up that because America or Europe use something, we must use the same thing here. It's not, we have to be a little bit more flexible in our thinking and understand that India is different.
Right, right. I guess that's all we have time for, Mr. Bhargava. There you have it, folks. Pivoting for the future is not just about EVs, but a pragmatic mix of vehicles overall. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhargava, for sparing time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bhargava and Ravi, for that interesting session. I would request Binoy to please give a token of appreciation to Mr. Bhargava. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Honorable Minister for Road Transport and Highways, Mr. Nitin Gadkari. So we have documented the highlights of your inspirational journey so far. I hope you like it. Can we play the AV, please?
At any cost, we should have good infrastructure in the country. If there is a will, there is a way. This is the golden era in the history of India, that we are making the road infrastructure of international standard.
We hope, sir, that you like the AV. Thank you so much for taking out the time to be here with us. I just want to point out to everyone sitting here that Mr. Gadkari arrived in a hydrogen car. So he's clearly living by the policies that he is implementing. Well, he is one of India's most sought-after ministers who's broken all records when it comes to delivery of very difficult projects. From building roads and highways at breakneck speed to the ambitious Char Dham project to India's waterways. Mr. Gadkari is often referred to as Mr. Roadkari. His relentless energy and focus has many in awe of him, so much so that when we are talking to investors from outside the country, they all want to know one thing: what is Mr. Gadkari thinking and what is he going to do next? So we have a lot of fund managers watching this live today. Thank you so much, sir, for being here. We'd like to invite you on stage to present the Highway of the Future, your vision for India.
All respectable dignitaries and dear friends, the futuristic development plan is very important for the country. Once philosopher explained it that you can donate eye, but you cannot donate vision. The vision for the futuristic development is very important, and for that reason we need to planning in advance, planning in detail for the future. Regarding the development of our country, particularly economic development, the 4 sectors are very important: water, power, transport and communication. Without that, we don't have industry and capital investment, and without that we cannot create employment potential and cannot eradicate the poverty. The most important thing is we have 500 blocks which are economically, educationally and socially backward, and 120 aspirant districts. So this is the time that in our GDP growth, 12% contribution from agriculture, 22 to 24% from manufacturing sector, and 52 to 56% from the service sector. In the futuristic development, we need to develop our economy in rural, agriculture and tribal area. And that is very important as far as our dream of our Prime Minister to make Indian economy as $5 trillion economy and Atmanirbhar Bharat. So exactly, already Mr. Bhargava was referring about it. From last 2004, particularly in the automobile sector, this is one of the important industry which has already created 4.5 crore jobs. This is the industry size is 7.5 lakh crore, and this is the industry which is giving maximum GST to the state government and central government. Now the idea is all reputed brands in the world, maximum all are present in India. And our automobile export is very important. Now presently, our two-wheeler manufacturers, Bajaj, TVS and Hero, they are already exporting their 50% of the production of two-wheeler. Regarding the other automobile industry also, there is a huge demand for the export. So now it is an opportunity for India because we have already started scrapping policy. Because of scrapping now, the raw material aluminium, copper, rubber, plastic and steel will be available with a reasonable rate by which we can reduce the cost of components, automobile components by 25 to 30%. And we will be more competitive in international market. The skilled manpower already we have, and we have already have a good research, not only in flex engine, but we have research on electric, ethanol, methanol, biodiesel, bio-LNG, bio-CNG, electric and hydrogen. Just 10 days before I got opportunity to launch 20 buses in Bangalore, adding 15% methanol in diesel. Now at the same program, Ashok Leyland launched their truck, which is on 100% methanol. The RCF in Mumbai, Deepak Fertilizer, Assam Petroleum, they are manufacturing methanol, and actually methanol rate is coming to 25 rupees per liter. It can be a good alternative for diesel. Then the most important thing is regarding ethanol also, that is to be fuel for the future. We are now giving permission to make ethanol from broken rice, from food grains, corn, and even we can make ethanol from sugarcane juice, molasses, C molasses and B molasses. Now we have got a lot of production of sugar, and sugar production is a big problem. Last year our excess production was 60 to 80 lakh ton was available. In this year also we are surplus. So this is the appropriate time for the agriculture that we need to divert sugar to ethanol. And that is the need of the hour. Many people talking about food versus fuel. Exactly the actual fact is that we have corn surplus, rice surplus, wheat surplus, sugar surplus. Our market price are actually less than MSP. And that is to be a big problem for the country, and where it is time for us to give more priority for the agriculture and that is diversification of agriculture towards energy and power sector, and the ethanol is the fuel. Regarding electric also, there is a good response. Actually, there is a waiting list now. On electric as a fuel is cheaper. In our power basket, our 38% of the power is solar power. Now we are giving priority to have more solar power in the country, because the thermal power, naturally it is true that it creates pollution. So creating more generation from wind power, solar power and hydropower, and by which we want to make it up to 60 to 70% in our power basket, by which this green power can be used for charging. So electric is the future. The most important thing is the ecology and environment is the most important agenda for the country. And the 40% of the air pollution is because of the transport sector. And that is the reason that we need to have alternative fuel. Carbon neutral economy is very important. The Prime Minister vision is before 2070, we want to make zero emission, and that is to be a most important challenge for the country. So now we are working on that, because sky is the limit. As far as the fossil fuel economy is concerned, there is a huge potential. So we have to go by all alternatives. So hydrogen is also the future. Now the hydrogen from the coal is black hydrogen. Hydrogen from the petroleum is the brown hydrogen. And we can make hydrogen from wastewater, using wastewater and organic waste. Now I am telling you the successful story. In Delhi Ring Road, we are using 20 lakh ton of municipal garbage. In Ahmedabad Dollar project, we are using 20 lakh ton of municipal garbage. So presently, for ecology and environment point of view, regarding solid waste management and liquid waste management, we need to have some private public investment. I am giving you the example, that is to be one of the successful example, that is of Mathura. When I was Water Resources Minister, we have taken the initiative, and project is 80 MLD sludge of Mathura. We have converted into clean water. The project was in hybrid annuity. The 40% from the grant in aid from the government and 60% from the investor. Triveni Engineering is the company. They got the project, and now clean water is given to Indian Oil, and they are giving 20 crore rupees royalty per year for that. So this project is economically viable. So my suggestion is, even in solid waste management, liquid waste management, we can invite private public investment. And that is to be most important thing as per the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And it is also going to reduce the pollution, water pollution and air pollution. At the same time, in automobile sector, regarding green hydrogen, we have got a lot of waste land is available. Now in Assam, we are making ethanol from bamboo. Indian Oil is doing. The parali burning is a big problem in Delhi. We have a project of Indian Oil Company in Panipat, where we are doing from parali 1 lakh liter of bioethanol per day and 150 ton of biobitumen per day. So now with the CRI and Central Research Road Organization, I have received the project with a proven technology that we can convert biomass, parali, rice straw into biobitumen. You just understand that presently our requirement of bitumen is 80 lakh ton, out of which 50 lakh ton capacity is with the Indian refineries, and 25 to 30 lakh ton of bitumen we have import. So if our farmer, the tractor molded unit of 20 lakhs rupees, now I am making that experiment because I am farmer centric. So we are going to start that scheme by which 20 lakhs of tractor molded unit will be there, by which farmers can make from parali biobitumen and organic carbon, biochar. Biochar is very important in agriculture. In my farm, because of organic carbon, my sugarcane production go up to 85 ton per acre. So we can add this biochar, organic carbon, that is to be most important for the agriculture. So definitely, as a futuristic technology is concerned, even in construction equipment, the Volvo has launched good big machinery on electric. we just, Tata and Leyland, they launched their trucks, IC engine, on hydrogen. And hydrogen is the fuel for the future. It is for industry like chemical industry, pharmaceutical industry, steel industry. And that is also that can be used in railway, aviation, truck transport, everywhere. It's a cheap fuel. Now, hydrogen by using electrolyzer is a costly thing because 1 kilo of hydrogen, we need 50 units of power. So by using solar power with electrolyzer, we can get the hydrogen. But in presently, Indian Science Research Institute in Bangalore, they have invented a good technology. In the biomass, without using electricity, we can get the hydrogen. So now there are a lot of experiments are going on. Even in the lithium ion, you probably know that it is to be 6% of the world stock. Now the lithium is available in Jammu and Kashmir. And where as early as possible you can take it. Presently we have import of 1200 ton of lithium ion every year. And by which we can reduce the cost of electric vehicle if our lithium will be available. And we will be the #1 manufacturing hub in the world, automobile manufacturing hub. My idea is within 5 years, we can go 100% to make this industry of 15 lakh crore. And all the world, we can make the export from here. The most important thing is public transport. Now, 30 crore car we have. The population growth and automobile growth, we have inherent expertise in our country. And that is to be a big problem. So, the idea is how we can create comfortably good transport for the people. I just got appointed to launch Volvo bus, sleeper coach, beautiful bus. Then they are making business class bus. And now people can use it. It is a lot of comforts are there. Even the ropeway, cable car, funicular railway, sky bus, these are the alternative. We have 260 proposals of cable car, ropeway and funicular railway, particularly Ladakh, Leh, Himachal, Uttarakhand and Kashmir. For the hill area, we can make this funicular rail for that. We are trying now in Ladakh and Leh, first pilot project, and if it is to be successful, then we want to repeat into different part of the hill area. And I am 100% confident that this can be a success story. The waterways is very important for the future. The waterway and electric highways is the futuristic planning. Regarding waterways, for example, the cost of road is coming 10 rupees, cost of railway is 6 rupees, cost of waterway is only 1 rupees. And even we can use amphibious seaplane for transport, and it can be possible that you can take plane anywhere, we don't need airport. So these are the new innovative technology. Already we have completed the waterways in Ganga. My idea was that at that time we submitted the report to World Bank, starting waterway from Panipat, coming to Delhi, Delhi to Mathura, Mathura to Agra, Agra to Etawah, and then Etawah to Allahabad. And Allahabad to Varanasi already there is 2.5 meter draft we have already done. And from Varanasi to Haldia to Calcutta, there is also 3.5 meter draft is completed. And after going to Haldia to Bengal Sea, we can go to Brahmaputra, and by Brahmaputra we can go up to Barak River and going up to Bangladesh also and Southeast Asia by using waterways. The waterways is the logistic cost is very less. And the idea is we can make our engines of particularly waterways on methanol. Already in Sweden, the Scania is the company, and there is lot of ships which are using methanol. So different alternative fuel, we will create more jobs in the country by reduce the pollution and at the same time reduce the logistic cost. Because the present our import of fossil fuel is more than 16 lakh crore. We are making a lot of green express highway. I have got a big list. The Delhi-Mumbai express highway is already 60% completed. Ahmedabad-Dholera, the work has started. Bangalore-Chennai, already 15% is completed. Delhi-Amritsar-Katra, the 62 kilometer work is completed. Kanpur-Lucknow, 63 kilometer. Then access control corridors, Ambala-Kotputli is completed, is of 12,000 crore. Amritsar-Bhatinda, Jamnagar is of 23,000 crore. It is 75% completed. Raipur-Vishakhapatnam, 465 kilometer, 18,000 crore. 15% is completed. Hyderabad, Visakhapatnam, 222 kilometers, 6,000 crore, 60 kilometers already completed. Urban extension road of Delhi, actually I got to visit there. It is so beneficial. When you come from Punjab, Haryana, near this, after Panipat, our peripheral road is there, and from just near to that, this road start. Now by coming to Delhi and going to airport, it takes 2.5 hours. And by this road, you can go up to Dwarka and airport by 20 minutes. So this is the most important road which is going to decongest Delhi. At the same time, Chennai, Salem, Chittoor, Thachur, then Bangalore Ring Road, then Delhi, Saharanpur, Dehradun. We will go Dehradun by 2 hours, Haridwar by 2 hours, Jaipur by 2 hours, Chandigarh by 2.5 hours, Katra by 6 hours, Srinagar by 8 hours, and even we can go Mumbai up to 12 hours. So these are the new roads which are totally going to change the total system. Now in Mumbai and Pune, there is no flight. When I got the opportunity to construct Mumbai-Pune Express Highway in 98-2000, now after that, all flights from Mumbai to Pune is closed. I am giving you the guarantee that up to end of this year, Delhi to Chandigarh and Delhi to Dehradun flight will be closed. Because no one will use that. So this is the lot of road we are making: Sanchor, Disha, Bangalore, Kadapa, Varanasi, Ranchi, Kolkata. This is of 23,000 crore. Total 27. Actually, the total length is 10,000 kilometers and cost coming to 6 lakh crore, out of which 2,625 kilometers is already completed. This is going to reduce the travel time, fuel cost. Our logistic cost now presently is up to 16%. In the European countries, it is 12%, and China it is 8 to 10%. We are trying that before end of 24. The logistic cost will come to single digit, up to 9%. And that is going to give good boost to our export. And it is very important for the country. We are also planning for making of electric highway. This is the futuristic plan. That highway will start from the Delhi Ring Road near the Panipat, they are connecting from that and taking up to Jaipur. So the idea is we are already have a discussion with the company and making a cable, and by which trolley bus we can start, because the electric is a very, very cheap and good fuel as compared with the other fuel that is important. Now we have electric buses, electric car, electric scooters, electric auto rickshaw, and e-rickshaw also. So that is totally very important for the futuristic planning is concerned, and it is going to increase the tourism. I am just telling you about we have the road from Delhi to Dehradun. We have, the road is not up to the mark. But my chief minister was telling me that tourism is increased by 2 times. So this is to be by making more roads. We are using their own car. People will go everywhere in the different part of the country. Is going to create more employment potential. The 49%, the capital investment in the tourism, they make their expenditure on particularly for employment potential 49%. So create employment in the country is very important. Pollution free, that is very important as ecology and environment we have to protect. We have to create more jobs, at the same time reduce the pollution and to make Indian economy strong. The Prime Minister's dream is to make Indian economy of $5 trillion, and that is to be most important thing to have that. For that reason, we need to reduce our import and increase our export. And the transport sector, the futuristic planning already we have. On the basis of that, we will make the road infrastructure of USA standard before end of 24. That is the dream for us. It's a conviction and mission for us, and we will try our level best to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for these words of wisdom. My colleague Shweta will now moderate the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gadkari, for presenting a very grand vision for India. It has all of us extremely enthused. The world is sitting up and taking notice of the work that's happening in India. The kind of highways we've built, 50,000 kilometers of national highways have been built in the last 8 years. We are talking about waterways. We are talking about electric highways. I want to ask you, how have we accomplished this? जो processes change किए गए हैं, जो institutionalize किए गए हैं, क्या changes लाए गए कि you were able to implement something like this, which was considered a very daunting task? Land acquisition issues हैं, financing issues रहते हैं. तो आपने क्या changes, what changes did you bring in to make this happen?
देखिए, पहली बात तो मैं बताने के लिए भूल गया. अभी हमारे यहाँ BOT, PPP, हाइब्रिड एन्युटी ये मॉडल थे. अभी हम इनविट में गए
जी,
और हमने हमारा पहला बॉन्ड इशू लॉन्च किया. तो उस समय 10 दिन के बाद उसको क्लोज करना था और एक कार्यक्रम बड़ा रखा था 10 दिन के बाद हमने मुंबई स्टॉक एक्सचेंज में. पर पहले दिन 7 घंटे में हमारा बॉन्ड इशू 7 टाइम्स ओवर सब्सक्राइब हुआ. 7 टाइम्स. तो पहली बात तो पैसे की कोई कमी नहीं है. और मैं आपको कहूंगा, पत्रकार यानी जो सर्विस करने वाले, पेंशन वाले, उनको, पुलिस कांस्टेबल, कंपाउंडर, सबको, कि NHI में इनविट में इन्वेस्ट करो. मैं आपको 8.05 इंटरेस्ट पर ईयर दूंगा और आपके अकाउंट में हर महीने ब्याज जमा करूंगा. कोई भी बैंक आपको इतना इंटरेस्ट नहीं देती. तो एक तो पैसे की कोई कमी नहीं है. बाद में हमारा बजट 2,30,000 करोड़ का है. तो अभी हम लोग क्या कह रहे हैं कि कुछ हम प्रोजेक्ट में हमारा पैसा कुछ देंगे 30-40%, कुछ पब्लिक प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट लाएंगे, और कुछ लोग जो एकदम इंटरनल रेट ऑफ रिटर्न जो अच्छा है वहाँ बिल्कुल प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट से करेंगे. तो मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं लगता.
नहीं सर, मैं पूछ रही हूँ कि जो प्रोसेसेस चेंज किए आपने, कैसे जो काम इतने सालों से नहीं हो पा रहे थे वो एकाएक कैसे होने लग गए?
देखिए, प्रॉब्लम्स है. लैंड एक्विजिशन में प्रॉब्लम है, एनवायरमेंट फॉरेस्ट क्लियरेंस में प्रॉब्लम है, कोर्ट के लिटिगेशन है. ये देश ऐसे ही चलेगा. इसको बहुत ज्यादा कोई बदल नहीं सकता. NGOs है, वो PIL डालते हैं, फिर आप जैसे लोग 4-4 कॉलम उनका छापते हैं. ये भी चलता है. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट यू, बट द पीपल उसको भी देते. एक तरफ हमको पूछते काम क्यों नहीं हो रहा, दूसरे तरफ जो अटकाते हैं उनको भी छाप देते हैं. तो ये चलते रहता है. पर मैं अक्सर लोगों को एक बात बताता हूँ कि देर आर सम पीपल who convert problems into opportunities and there are some people who convert opportunities into the problems. तो प्रॉब्लम्स को सॉल्व करने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए. इसमें 3 बातें इंपॉर्टेंट है. पॉजिटिविटी, ट्रांसपेरेंसी, करप्शन फ्री सिस्टम, डेवलपमेंट ओरिएंटेड अप्रोच एंड कमिटमेंट. और ओनरशिप. प्रॉब्लम क्या होता है कि कहीं भी ओनरशिप चाहिए कि भाई ये मेरा काम है, मुझे करना है. ओनरशिप एंड अकाउंटेबिलिटी. मैं अक्सर कहता हूं कि फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, बट परफॉर्मेंस ऑडिट इज मोर इंपॉर्टेंट देन फाइनेंशियल ऑडिट. बहुत से लोग रब का फेयर करने का काम सरकार में करते हैं. तो कहीं ना कहीं उनको बोलना चाहिए कि व्हाट इज योर कंट्रीब्यूशन, आपने क्या किया. तो परफॉर्मेंस ऑडिट, और इसके साथ फिर लोग मिलते हैं, किसी को हम निकाल भी नहीं सकते. कभी मीठा बोलना, कभी कड़ा बोलना, चलाते रहना, प्रॉब्लम रिजॉल्व करना और आगे जाना.
तो आपने किया परफॉर्मेंस ऑडिट?
मैं हेयर प्रोजेक्ट का भी मैं प्रोजेक्ट रिव्यू करने के लिए जाता हूँ जी. क्वालिटी के बारे में मैं देखता हूँ. मैंने अभी क्वालिटी के बारे में जो बहुत ही स्ट्रिक्ट व्यक्ति है, जो कोई मैनेज ही नहीं कर सकता, ऐसे को तुम क्वालिटी कंट्रोल कर जाओ, चेक करो. तो कभी ना कभी प्रॉब्लम्स है. पर नहीं, अच्छा दूसरी नहीं, अभी हमने बाम्बू का क्रैश बैरियर बनाया. तो पहले तो डिपार्टमेंट तैयारी नहीं था कि बाम्बू का कैसा बनेगा, क्या होगा. फिर बनाया, फिर इंदौर में उसकी टेस्ट हुई, अप्रूव होगा. अभी मैं कह रहा हूं कि नॉर्थ ईस्ट में क्रैश बैरियर लोहे के बजाय बाम्बू के बनेंगे. अब हम लोग रबर जो टायर है, वेस्ट टायर, उसकी पाउडर करने के लिए वेस्ट टायर को मैंने इंपोर्ट करने की परमिशन दिलाई एनवायरमेंट मिनिस्ट्री से. क्योंकि ये जो हमारी सर्कुलेशन की इकोनॉमी है, अब उससे हम लोग 15% रबर पाउडर बिटुमेन में डालते हैं, तो वो नया उद्योग हो गया. प्लास्टिक डालने लगे हैं, अभी कचरा डालने लगे हैं. अभी मैं जमशेदपुर में था आज, तो वहाँ टाटा की जो स्लैग थी पड़ी हुई है, पहाड़े पड़े हुए हैं, तो पूरा वहाँ हमने यूज किया. और मैं एक्चुअली दोनों MD से बात कर रहा हूँ कि बिहार में उन्होंने मनाही कर दिया, स्टोन ही नहीं मिलता. तो मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि जमशेदपुर से और भी उरी अपने झारखंड से वो रेलवे से लेकर बिहार में ले आए. प्रॉब्लम्स है. अब उन्होंने मिट्टी भी उठाना नहीं और स्टोन भी लेना, तो रोड कैसे बनाना. मैं कम से कम 3-4 लाख करोड़ के रोड बिहार में बना रहा हूँ. तो देर आर प्रॉब्लम्स. पर प्रॉब्लम्स का उपाय ढूंढने में हम लोग कोशिश करते हैं जो स्ट्रॉन्ग पॉलिटिकल विल.
जी
इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. मैं बहुत बार कहता हूँ
जी
कि इफ देर इज ए विल देर इज ए वे, एंड इफ देर इज नो विल देर इज ओनली सर्वे, डिस्कशन, सेमिनार, कमिटी, सब कमिटी एंड रिसर्च ग्रुप. So that is always I am telling to the people that you do it, do or die. और मैंने कहा I like people who can get the things done. मुझे वो ज्ञान मत दो कि ये क्यों नहीं होता, मैं नहीं सुनता. मुझे बताओ ये होता कैसे, आप करके दिखाओ. तो that is to be important, and ऐसी अच्छे बुरे अनुभव आते रहते पर चलते रहती गाड़ी.
सर क्वालिटी की आपने बात
आपको एक पता, ये दिल्ली का जो ये है ना,
जी
ये रोड बना अभी दिल्ली रिंग रोड, जो मैंने जिसका उल्लेख किया, ये हमारा रोड नहीं था. ये परवेश वर्मा मेरे पास 5-6 बार आए. 6वें बार मैंने बोला ठीक है मैं देखता हूँ. फिर ये मैंने अपने एलजी थे बैजल साहब, उनको बुलाया. उन्होंने कहा ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट रोड है. मुझे पता ही नहीं था क्योंकि दिल्ली में ज्यादा जानता नहीं. परसों मुझे समझ में आया. तो बाद में उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं आप करिए. फिर वो डीडीए का रोड था. फिर डीडीए को मैंने कहा कि कुछ जगह दो हमको. उन्होंने कुछ एक्वायर की थी, कुछ एक्वायर करने की थी. फिर 2000 करोड़ की लैंड हमने एक्वायर की. उन्होंने कहा कि हम लैंड देते हैं. फिर वो डीडीए चेयरमैन बदल गए. वो बोले हम लैंड नहीं देते, वो बहुत ज्यादा कीमत की हो गई, हम पैसे देते. फिर उनने 2,500-3 हजार करोड़ कुछ दिए. 10-1 करोड़ का रोड है, पूरा हो गया. फिर एक जगह पूरी बस्ती थी, 4000 घरों को तोड़ना था. अब वो भी एक प्रॉब्लम कि डीडीए, दिल्ली सरकार, म्यूनिसिपल कॉर्पोरेशन, भारत सरकार, वो घर तोड़ना. तो फिर मैंने कहा वो नाला था, तो नाले के बीच में 8 लेन का ब्रिज बना दिया. और वो पूरा ब्रिज बना के हमने वो प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व किया. 400 घर केवल तोड़े और उसमें से प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करके अब रोड 4 महीने में पूरा होगा और दिल्ली का आधा पोल्यूशन कम करेगा.
ये कौन सी रोड की बात कर रहे हैं सर?
ये जो पानीपत के बाद जो पेरिफेरल रोड है ना, हम लोग जो चंडीगढ़ वाला रोड है उससे आते हैं, तो हम दिल्ली की तरफ आने के पहले ही अभी 4 ब्रिजेस वहां बन रहे. मुकरबा चौक वगैरह जो रोड का है ना, तो वहां से एक एकदम राइट हैंड पलटकर अप टू द्वारका तक, एयरपोर्ट तक रोड है. फिर एयरपोर्ट में हमने वो शिव मूर्ति के पास टनल बनाई रहे भी. वो टनल एक वसंत विहार में जाएगी, एक T3 पे जाएगी. और उधर द्वारका एक्सप्रेस हाईवे बना रहे 10,000 करोड़ का. द्वारका एक्सप्रेस हाईवे से डायरेक्ट निकलकर आप दिल्ली मुंबई हाईवे पे जाओगे और उधर जयपुर की तरफ भी जा सकेंगे.
सर ये तो इट इज ट्रूली रिमार्केबल सर, एज इन जो अभी तक आपने एग्जीक्यूट किया है और जो आगे के प्लान्स हैं. सर क्वालिटी पे थोड़े कंसर्न्स अभी रेज हुए थे जब बेंगलुरु मैसूर एक्सप्रेस पे पानी जमा हो गया था. इज दैट समथिंग दैट यू आर क्लोजली मॉनिटरिंग? आप इज दैट अ कंसर्न फॉर यू?
क्वालिटी एक कंसर्न है. हम लोग कंक्रीट रोड बना रहे हैं. बिटवीन रोड में क्या होता है कि अभी जैसे मैंने मुंबई पुणे हाईवे बनाया, अभी भी गड्ढे नहीं उसके ऊपर. अभी मेरे शहर में मैंने पूरा शहर कंक्रीट रोड बना दिया मेरे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में. वो 6 इंच और 8 इंच का व्हाइट टॉपिंग किया है. अब प्रॉब्लम यह है कि बिटुमिन रोड के भी प्रॉब्लम है. दूसरा, हमारे यहाँ जो ड्रेनेज सिस्टम बनती है उसकी लेवल वो चेक करना थोड़ी कमियां है. और मुझे एक्सेप्ट करने में कोई नहीं होता कि हम उसको इम्प्रूव करें. क्योंकि क्या हुआ कि कर्नाटक में इलेक्शन जाहिर होने वाला था, कोड ऑफ कंडक्ट लगने वाला था. तो पूरा काम होने के पहले थोड़ा हमने, चीफ मिनिस्टर ने मुझे आग्रह किया, थोड़ा जल्दबाजी में काम किया तो कुछ बातें रह गई. कुछ जगह पर पानी छोड़ना है. अब ये आप कभी कर्नाटक जाओगे, बेंगलोर, मैसूर, ये इतना फर्टाइल लैंड है वहाँ, 1-1 फुट के लिए लोग अस्वस्थ है. इतनी सुंदर लैंड है. और इसलिए वो करते समय हमने काफी बाईपास बनाए. कुछ जगह है पर उसका अभी काम होगा. एक 15-20 दिन में वो पूरा, वैसे काम चल ही रहा था पर थोड़े बहुत प्रॉब्लम है. और क्वालिटी के बारे में हम बहुत ही स्ट्रिक्टली देख रहे हैं. देखो हम करप्शन फ्री है. मैं अभी तक जितने डिपार्टमेंट में था 50 लाख करोड़ रुपए के काम दे चुका हूं. कोई कॉन्ट्रैक्टर को मेरे पास नहीं आना पड़ा. और इसलिए कॉन्ट्रैक्टर अगर ठीक काम नहीं करेंगे तो रगड़ देंगे उनको. हम उनको, मैंने कहा है कि नथिंग डूइंग, जो भी करेगा उसको कार्रवाई करो. तो अभी क्वालिटी के बारे में हमने नए मटेरियल यूज कर रहे हैं, नए प्रयोग कर रहे हैं. थोड़ा सा क्वालिटी के बारे में. अच्छा भैया, आज आप कभी गोवा गई इतने में?
जी.
तो गोवा में हमने नया ब्रिज बनाया, जो गोवा का 4 लेन बनाया. उसकी क्वालिटी बहुत बेस्ट है. अच्छा काम हुआ है. तो अब क्वालिटी के बारे में भी हम ध्यान दे रहे हैं. और थोड़ा भी 5 साल की डिफेक्ट लायबिलिटी रहती है. तो इन सब रोड में हमने दिल्ली, अभी मैं दिल्ली जयपुर में एक बार खुद ट्रैवल करने वाला हूँ. वहाँ एक ऐसा बनाया था घटिया रोड साइड सेंटर. तो मैंने बोला इसको बुलडोजर लाओ, डेट बताओ, जिस दिन ये पूरा तोड़ना है मैं आऊंगा यहाँ, उखाड़ के फेंको इसको पूरा। और वो अभी उखाड़ के फेंक रहे पूरा। इतना गलत डिजाइनिंग, गलत प्लानिंग किया था। अब वो थोड़ा उनको भी अनुभव आया, पहले क्या चल जाता था। यहाँ भी एक दिल्ली मेरठ पर बना था। मैंने बोला ये रोड साइड एम्यूनिटी है तो वॉशरूम से भी खराब है, मतलब आपको तुड़वाई पूरी। तो कहीं ना कहीं अब लोगों को पता चलेगा कि अपन ने किया हुआ काम तोड़ डालेंगे, तो थोड़ा सा अवेयरनेस उनमें बढ़ेगा। नहीं तो चल जाता है वाला मामला होता है, तो फिर वो क्वालिटी के साथ कॉम्प्रोमाइज होता है।
आर यू थिंकिंग कि पेनल्टी इम्पोज की जाए अगर बिल्डर ने अच्छा काम नहीं किया, कॉन्ट्रैक्टर ने अच्छा काम नहीं किया है, तो कोई पेनल्टी? क्या
है कि अभी सबसे बड़ा ऐसा है कि हमारे 42% कॉन्ट्रैक्टर का रेटिंग किया है, एक अच्छे बहुत बड़े फाइनेंशियल एजेंसी ने किया है, उनके पास है। अब मैं चाहता हूं कि हम कॉन्ट्रैक्टर का रेटिंग करें, पर हिंदुस्तान में क्या है सिस्टम की लोएस्ट जो आता है उसको देना पड़ता है। अगर हमने किसी लोएस्ट में किसी गलत आदमी लोग ले, अभी दिल्ली जयपुर मैं गालियां खाता हूं, जो आदमी को मिला वो काम ही नहीं कर पा रहा, हम टर्मिनेट नहीं कर पाए। और आज मैं आप अच्छा हो गया आप बोला, मैं आप इसको अच्छे प्रकाशित करिए कि दिल्ली जयपुर के कारण पूरे लोग तंग है और दिल्ली हाईकोर्ट ने स्टे दिया, हमारा काम बंद है। अब मैंने बोला कि वहां बोर्ड लगा दो कि ये रोड है, दिल्ली हाईकोर्ट ने इसको स्टे दिया है, इसके कारण हम कॉन्ट्रैक्टर को टर्मिनेट नहीं कर सकते, इसलिए कोर्ट ने स्टे देने के कारण हम जनता की क्षमा मांग रहे हैं क्योंकि हम काम नहीं कर पा रहे। तो मैंने लगाओ बोर्ड वहां, अब करेंगे क्या? तो कहीं ऐसे भी प्रॉब्लम है। और दिल्ली जयपुर ये लोग जाते होंगे, ये रोड पे 1300 करोड़ के काम मंजूर है। और वो एक चैनल ने कार्टून भी बनाए थे उसके ऊपर, बहुत नाराज हुआ था।
जुडिशरी, मैं जुडिशरी की बात करना चाह रही थी आपसे कि जुडिशरी आपके लिए कितने चैलेंजेस पोज कर रही है अभी, क्योंकि एनवायरमेंटल ग्रुप्स हैं, आपने एनजीओस की बात की, लेकिन कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इन्फोर्समेंट केसेस अभी तक 1991 का स्टॉक मार्केट स्कैम भी अभी तक चल रहा है कोर्ट्स में। तो जैसे अभी आपने बताया काम रुका हुआ है।
नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है, सब लोग ऐसे नहीं है। ये 4 धाम में हमें बहुत अड़चन आई। मैंने अभी देखो आपको एक बात, मैं भी इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट के बाजू से हूँ। अभी हमने द्वारका एक्सप्रेस हाईवे में 12,000 प्लांट ट्रांसप्लांट किए। अभी मैंने ट्रांसप्लांटेशन करने की पॉलिसी लाई और मैंने कहा बने तक पेड़ तोड़ो मत, पहली बात उसको ट्रांसप्लांट करो। अगर ट्रांसप्लांट नहीं हुआ तो फिर अलग बात है, वो अनसक्सेसफुल हुआ तो हम भी पेड़ों को लगाना चाहिए। अभी मेरी कल्पना मालूम नहीं होता कि नहीं, ये जो दिल्ली मुंबई हाईवे है इसमें एक भीमा बाम्बू है कर्नाटक का। अभी कल मैंने उनको प्लान किया कि दोनों बाजू में बाम्बू लगेगा और इतना फास्ट ग्रोथ होती है उसकी कि उसकी एक टनल बन जाएगी ग्रीन। और ऐसी बहुत जगह हमने बनाई है। और अभी हम लोग 3 मीटर के ऊपर के पेड़ लगा रहे हैं। इस साल हमने 2.25 करोड़ पेड़ लगाए, उसको ई टैग किया है। फ्यूल में, इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट में हम वाटर पोल्यूशन, एयर पोल्यूशन और साउंड पोल्यूशन, तीनों के बारे में मैं भी इतना ही आग्रही हूं क्योंकि ये देश के लिए बहुत आवश्यक है। पर इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट को प्रोटेक्ट करते हुए हमको काम भी करना पड़ेगा। और जैसे हमने अभी एक कचरा हम डाल रहे हैं, अभी दिल्ली में 3 टेकड़ी है, माउंटेन है कचरे के, गाजीपुर और 2 मुझे नाम मालूम नहीं। अब ये विवाद होता रहा, कौन करेगा, सेग्रीगेट कौन करेगा। तो मैंने कहा हम मशीन लगाओ। अब हमने दिल्ली मेरठ में पूरा डाल रहे हैं, अभी हम लोग अभी इसमें डाल रहे हैं। तो मेरा प्रयास है कि जैसे रोड बनाना, वैसे दिल्ली में जो कचरे की 3 टेकड़ियां है बड़ी, बहुत गंदगी फैलाती है, वो तीनों को 2 साल के अंदर साफ कर देना, पूरा रोड में यूज करना। तो ये अभी पानी यूज करना है रोड में, तो ये जो रिसाइकलिंग वाटर है, जो गंदा पानी था उसको यूज करना, फिर प्लास्टिक और रबर का उपयोग करना, बाम्बू का क्रैश बैरियर करना, अल्टरनेटिव फ्यूल को चूसना, उसको लाना। तो एक तरफ से इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट को ही प्रोटेक्ट। और मुझे अनुभव ऐसा है कि कोर्ट भी आजकल जैसे 4 धाम में है, हमारे यहाँ डिफेंस मिनिस्ट्री ने भी एफिडेविट दिया था कि ये डायरेक्ट चाइना बॉर्डर के जाता है, स्ट्रेटेजिक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू इंपॉर्टेंट है। तो फिर प्रॉब्लम्स आते हैं, हम भी उसको उचित प्रकार से प्रेजेंट करते हैं, लड़ते रहते हैं। और ये तो इट इज ए पार्ट एंड पार्ट ऑफ द लाइफ।
तो 4 धाम अपना टारगेट मीट करेगा? 4 धाम आप बना पाएंगे?
काफी बन गया है जी, अब जाके नहीं गई नहीं इतने में उत्तराखंड बन गया है काफी। अभी तो मैं रोड जो बना रहा हूँ जिसकी मुझे चिंता है वो मानस सरोवर का पिथौरागढ़ से। अभी मुझे लेटेस्ट इन्फॉर्मेशन 87% काम पूरा हुआ है।
87%। लेकिन जो इन्वायरमेंट कंसर्न्स निकल के आए हैं, जैसे जोशीमठ में क्रैक्स दिखे गए, देहरादून से बहुत कंसर्न आई है कि इन हिली एरियाज में जो काम हो रहा है उसको वो काम करने का तरीका शायद हमको रीथिंक करना पड़ेगा। तो आप जैसे इन प्रोजेक्ट्स को एग्जीक्यूट कर रहे हैं, आप थोड़ी अपनी स्ट्रैटेजी बदलने का सोच
देखो
रहे
ये
हैं
थोड़ा
सेंसिटिव
सा
एरियाज में?
मैं
जी
थोड़ा जियोलॉजी जानता हूँ।
जी
उसमें कैसा है कि एक जियोलॉजी में एक हार्डनेस के ऊपर एक मोहा स्केल ऑफ हार्डनेस थी, टाल, जिप्सम, कैल्साइट, एपेटाइट, ऑर्थोक्लेट्स, क्वार्ट्ज, कोरंडम, डायमंड। तो ये जो पूरा डाटा है ये उत्तराखंड का, वो फ्राजिल डाटा है, इसीलिए इसके कारण वो उसमें बहुत सी अड़चने हैं। तो एकदम रोड के कारण और किस कारण ये हुआ है ऐसा एकदम ओपिनियन बना ठीक नहीं, उसकी इंक्वायरी हो रही है। बाकी सिस्टम में कहीं भी इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए थोड़ा ज्यादा पैसा लगेगा तो भी चलेगा। हम हर समय इकोलॉजी एंड एनवायरनमेंट को प्रोटेक्ट करने की कोशिश करेंगे। और जोशीमठ के में तो हमने बाहर से रिंग रोड बनाया, और जो जोशीमठ का जो गांव है उसमें इतना इंक्रोचमेंट है और ड्रेनेज सिस्टम नहीं, कहीं पानी पूरा छोड़ दे रहे उसमें। और वो जो पर्वत है वो तो कोई ब्लैक रॉक थोड़ी है, वो एक प्रकार से वहाँ की बहुत सी बातें, मैं कोई ऑफिशियल कमेंट नहीं करूंगा, पर अभी इंक्वायरी होगी कमेटी की, उसमें से जो कुछ आएगा उसके आधार पर हम लोग जरूर चिंता करेंगे।
जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर की पार्टिसिपेशन है रोड बिल्डिंग में, हाईवे बिल्डिंग में, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बिल्डिंग में, गवर्नमेंट ने खूब पैसा लगाया है, लेकिन प्राइवेट सेक्टर अभी भी बहुत डर डर के इस सेक्टर को अप्रोच करता है।
देखिए, मैंने जब मंत्री करके चार्ज लिया था, हमारे छिब्बर साहब बैठे यहाँ, ये उस समय सेक्रेटरी थे, तब हमारे पास 406 प्रोजेक्ट 3,85,000 करोड़ के स्टॉल प्रोजेक्ट थे जो बंद पड़े थे। लैंड एक्विजिशन नहीं, यूटिलिटी शिफ्टिंग नहीं, रेलवे के प्रॉब्लम, सब कोर्ट की केसेस। और हम रात दिन बैठते थे, साहब भी थे उस समय, 12-12 बजे तक बैठते थे, सबको बोला, पंचायत भरती थी। और आपको आश्चर्य लगेगा कि उस समय हम सब ने प्रयास करके भारतीय बैंकों को 3 लाख करोड़ के एनपीए से बचाया, और हमने वो सब प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व किए। तो प्रॉब्लम तो है, पर इन्वेस्टर उसके कारण फिर बीओटी में वगैरह आने के लिए डर गए। फिर जब बीओटी में नहीं आ रहे थे तो मैंने हाइब्रिड एनओटी का मॉडल लाया। फिर अब कॉन्ट्रैक्टर थोड़े अभी अच्छे स्थिति में आए हैं, अब फिर पीपीपी चालू करेंगे बीओटी में। और मुझे लगता है कि अब 25, 30, 40 कॉन्ट्रैक्टर ऐसे जो बीड करते हैं, पहले ये संख्या 3-4 पर आई थी, वो भी बेचारे अड़चन में आए थे। तो नेचुरली इन्वेस्टर डरते थे, क्योंकि उस समय अभी हमने एक निर्णय किया कि 90% लैंड एक्वायर्ड किए बिना हम अपॉइंटमेंट डेट ही नहीं देंगे। हम प्रोजेक्ट शुरू करने के पहले इन्वायरमेंट फॉरेस्ट का क्लियरेंस लेंगे और सब प्रॉब्लम पहले निपटाएंगे, फिर वर्क ऑर्डर देंगे। उसके कारण अभी प्रोजेक्ट हमारे स्मूथ चल रहे हैं, हमें प्रॉब्लम नहीं आ रहा और काफी बड़े प्रमाण पर गति बढ़ी है।
जैसे अगर हम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कंपनीज की बात करते हैं तो चंद ही नाम हमारे जहन में आते हैं, L&T हो गया, 1-2 कंपनीज और हो गई। इंडिया में ऐसा क्या है कि हम बड़ी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कंपनीज अभी तक बना नहीं पाए?
पहली बात बताओगे, आप थोड़ा सा गलत बोल रही है।
अच्छा।
पहले ये 3-4 कंपनियां थी। मुझे अपनी गलती भी स्वीकारने में कभी संकोच नहीं होता। तब मैंने क्या किया, ये टेक्निकल और फाइनेंशियल क्वालिफिकेशन थे इतने डाइल्यूट कर दिए कि आज L&T जैसी और बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां थी, ऐसी अब 25-30 कंपनियां हो गई। और वो कंपनियां लो कॉस्ट में डालते हैं, कंपटीशन होने लगी। फिर मेरे ध्यान में आया कि मैंने जो पेंडुलम था वो एकदम इधर चला गया था। अब मैं फिर उसको थोड़ा, क्योंकि वो उसमें कोई भी छोटे लोग भी 25%, 30% भी लो, 35% भी लो, तो फिर मुझे ध्यान में आया कि ये गड़बड़ हो गई। अब फिर हम करके उसको बीच में ला रहे हैं। अभी देश में आपको बताता हूँ, इतनी बड़ी बड़ी कंपनियां हैं कि जिनका किसी के पास 50,000 करोड़ के काम है, किसी के पास 40,000 करोड़ के, 30,000 करोड़ के हैं, और वो एक से एक कंपनी है, अभी कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं। अब L&T ने टेंडर भरना कम किया, क्यों बोलते हैं मुझे बहुत कंपटीशन होती है, जो पहले जैसी स्थिति है वैसी नहीं रही।
2023 में मिस्टर गडकरी, आपने अपने लिए क्या टारगेट्स रखे हैं? क्योंकि ये प्री इलेक्शन ईयर है, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर इस सरकार की सबसे अच्छी सक्सेस स्टोरी है, तो आपने अपने लिए, आपके मंत्रालय ने क्या क्या टारगेट्स रखे हैं?
मैं इतना सोचता भी नहीं और टारगेट वगैरह इतना पॉलिटिकल नहीं सोचता। मैं सोचता हूँ कि हमें अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली है देश का अच्छा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाने की, कम समय में जितने ज्यादा से ज्यादा काम हो सके। बस पोर्ट बना रहा हूँ, 5-100 बस पोर्ट बना रहा हूँ, 260 रोपवे, केबल कार, फेनिकुलर रेलवे बना रहा हूँ, 2 लाख करोड़ के लॉजिस्टिक पार्क बना रहा हूँ, धीरे धीरे ग्रीन हाईवे के उस पर। तो जितने काम है वो जल्दी, अच्छे, करप्शन फ्री, फास्ट ट्रैक डिसीजन मेकिंग प्रोसेस, क्वालिटी के कैसे बने, इसको जितनी गति दे सकता है उतना करने की मैं कोशिश करते रहता हूँ। एक बात जरूर है कि हमारे यहाँ रिसर्च, नए मटेरियल को स्वीकार करना, नए टेक्नोलॉजी को स्वीकार करना, कॉस्ट ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्शन को कम करना, क्वालिटी ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्शन को इम्प्रूव करना। एक हुआ कि जितना रिसर्च का माहौल हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में, सरकार में होना चाहिए उतना नहीं है। तो मैं एक रिसर्च ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को भी डेवलप करना चाहता हूँ। और ये जो अल्टरनेटिव मटेरियल्स है, जैसे ये परली से बिटुमिन बनाना, अब ये सेंट्रल रिसर्च रोड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने किया। ऐसी बहुत सी बातें कि जिसमें आने वाले समय में स्टील और स्टील का अल्टरनेटिव ढूंढना। अभी हमने ग्लास फाइबर स्टील को अलाउ किया। क्या है, एक आदमी की मोनोपोली होती है तो वो एक्सप्लॉइट करता है। सीमेंट वालों को मैंने बीच में तय किया था कि पूरे सीमेंट का रोड बनाऊंगा, तो सीमेंट वालों ने कार्टेल करके रेट बढ़ाना शुरू किया, तो मुझे अपना स्टैंड बदलना पड़ा। मैंने कहा हटाओ इनको, बिटुमिन बनाओ। अभी ये छोटे मोटे प्रॉब्लम आते रहते हैं। अभी हम लोग इतना मिट्टी का एग्रीगेट का लेयर इतना 1.5-2 मीटर करते हैं, अब उसको सोच रहे कि सॉइल स्टेबिलाईज करके हम उसको कम कर सकते हैं क्या। तो टेक्नोलॉजी विदाउट कॉम्प्रोमाइज विद द क्वालिटी, इसमें डिपार्टमेंट में हमने कुछ IIT को साथ में लिया है।
अच्छा।
तो मैंने उनको कहा कि हम उनको पैसा देंगे, उनसे काम कर। अभी ये ऑटोमोबाइल के ऊपर हमने काफी IIT का काम लेते हैं। तो बहुत सी बातों में, ट्रांसपोर्ट में हमने काफी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की मदद करते हैं। अब ये जो इलेक्ट्रिक बसेस है, तो मेरी इच्छा है कि हमारे देश में 1.5 लाख बसेस हैं, तो ये 10 लाख हो इलेक्ट्रिक पर। क्योंकि डीजल की बस जाती है तो 115 रुपए पर किलोमीटर खर्चा होता है मुंबई में बेस्ट की। अब इलेक्ट्रिक बस का हमारा जो टेंडर आया है वो नॉन AC बस का 39 रुपीज पर किलोमीटर और AC का 41 रुपीज पर किलोमीटर। तो हम ये कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि हम इलेक्ट्रिक बस को कंफर्ट्स कैसे देंगे, 30% टिकट रेट कम करके पूरे लोग बसेस में घूमे। अभी जैसे वंदे मातरम ट्रेन आई, मैं नागपुर में ब्रॉडगेज मेट्रो को डेवलप कर रहा हूँ। तो ये जो पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट को हम इनकरेज कैसे करें, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। अभी हर आदमी कार लेता है, और दिल्ली में तो कार लेने वालों को तो ऐसा है कि हमारा रोड है उनके लिए पार्किंग के लिए बना है। ये कोई बंगले बांधते हैं और अपने घर में पार्किंग ही नहीं करते। ये ऐसा उधर नहीं, हमारे यहाँ मुंबई में नहीं है। ये हमारे यहाँ सब हर आदमी अपने घर में पार्किंग करता है। यहाँ तो सब बड़े बड़े लोगों के घर जाओ तो रोड पे गाड़ियां खड़ी करनी पड़ती। तो ये पार्किंग के बारे में मैं कानून बनाने वाला हूँ। मैंने कहा है कि जो रोड पर गाड़ी खड़ा करेगा उसका फोटो जो निकालेगा, उसको जो फाइन लगेगा उसको उसके से 20% उसको इंसेंटिव मिलेंगे। तो लगा फोटो निकाल। क्योंकि ये धीरे धीरे पार्किंग भी लोगों ने बनानी चाहिए। अब हमने बड़े बड़े पार्किंग बना रहे हैं, मैकेनाइज्ड पार्किंग में।
जी, दिल्ली में भी होंगे?
हाँ, अभी हिमाचल में मैं 2-3 जगह हमने हमारी है, वहाँ 300-400 गाड़ियों का मैकेनाइज्ड पार्किंग बना रहे हैं। दिल्ली में भी जगह मिलेगी तो जरूर हम करेंगे। अभी हमारे रोड पर हम कोशिश कर रहे हैं।
सर, रोड सेफ्टी के बारे में भी आपने आप बहुत पैशनेटली बिलीव करते हैं रोड सेफ्टी, और काफी अनफॉर्चुनेट एक्सीडेंट्स हुए हैं, नए एक्सप्रेसवेज पे, हाईवेज पे हुए हैं। उस रोड सेफ्टी लोगों को कैसे जागरूक किया जाए कि गाड़ी कैसे चलाई जाए इन हाईवेज पे जिसपे स्पीड लिमिट बहुत ज्यादा है, क्योंकि क्लियरली वहां पे एक्सीडेंट्स हो रहे हैं और इट्स अ मैटर ऑफ ह्यूज कंसर्न।
देखिए, एक बात तो बिल्कुल सही है आपकी कि ये एक सब्जेक्ट है कि जिसमें हमारा परफॉर्मेंस अप टू द मार्क नहीं है। 5 लाख एक्सीडेंट हो रहे, 1.5 लाख मौतें हो रही है, और देश का 3% GDP का नुकसान हो रहा है। और इसका कारण एक तो कुछ रोड इंजीनियरिंग, कुछ ऑटोमोबाइल इंजीनियरिंग, दोनों में हमने काफी सुधार किया। ये DPR बनते थे वो डिफेक्टिव है, उसके कारण एक्शन काफी हमने ऑडिट शुरू किया रोड का, हर रोड का कर रहे ताकि वो ब्लैक स्पॉट्स को हम इम्प्रूव उसको सुधारें। ऑटोमोबाइल इंजीनियरिंग में हमने काफी सुधार किया है, और इकोनॉमिक मॉडल में भी एयर बैग्स लाई है। तो अभी दूसरी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है एजुकेशन और पर्टिकुलरली इन्फोर्समेंट। अब लाइसेंस, हिंदुस्तान में ऐसा देश, मैं अगर इनको पूछूं कि आप में से कितने लोग हैं कि जो RTO ऑफिस में जाकर परीक्षा देकर आपने लाइसेंस मिलाया है, तो ये बेचारे एम्ब्रोसिंग पोजीशन में आ जाएंगे, क्योंकि हमारी आप हैं, पर मेजॉरिटी लोग घर में बैठ के लाइसेंस मिलता है। तो ये टोटल सिस्टम में अभी हमने किया, काफी उसमें डिजिटल सिस्टम लाई है। अब एक हम लोग अमेरिका जैसी एक इंटरनेट पर उसकी छोटी एग्जाम भी करेंगे और धीरे धीरे स्टेट, ये क्या कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट में है, तो नेचुरली ह्यूमन बिहेवियर को बदलना। रेड सिग्नल है तो चुप रह, नीचे रहना, नई गाड़ी लेके जाना, रॉन्ग साइड नहीं जाना, कभी जो रूल्स ऑफ द रोड है उसका पालन करना। तो हम बच्चों के ऊपर कॉन्सेंट्रेट कर रहे हैं, बड़े प्रमाण पर एजुकेशन कर रहे हैं, यूनिवर्सिटी, कॉलेजेस। अभी अमिताभ बच्चन जी ने इसके लिए मुझे कहा कि मैं ₹1 ना निःशुल्क पूरा इसके लिए मदद करूंगा। अक्षय कुमार मदद कर रहे हैं, काफी क्रिकेटियर्स मदद कर रहे हैं, पब्लिक कैंपेन कर रहे हैं, मीडिया ग्रुप कर रहे हैं। और मैं आपको भी अनुरोध करूंगा, अभी लेन डिसिप्लिन, अभी हमने अभी वर्ल्ड स्टैंडर्ड में कैसे साइनेजेस लगते हैं वो उसका स्टडी किया। अब सब जगह वो साइनेजेस लगा रहे हैं, हमारी कमियों को भी दूर कर रहे हैं। और जब तक ह्यूमन बिहेवियर नहीं बदलता तब तक ये नहीं हो पाएगा। और इसलिए ह्यूमन बिहेवियर बदलना ये केवल सरकार नहीं कर सकती, इसमें हमको इंडस्ट्री का, सोसाइटी का, एनजीओ का, एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का, मीडिया का सहयोग चाहिए। और फिलहाल अभी तक देश की स्थिति में मेरे पास डाटा है, अभी भी हम चाहते थे कि 2024 के पहले हम 50% डेथ्स और एक्सीडेंट कम करेंगे, पर अभी तक हम उसमें ज़्यादा काम नहीं कर पाए।
सर, ये आपकी ह्यूमिलिटी है कि आपने मान भी लिया कि इस डिपार्टमेंट में थोड़ा काम स्लो रहा है। और
नहीं, हम कितना फास्ट किया हमने काम। मैंने आपको तो मेरा एक्सीडेंट हुआ है
जी,
मेरा 4 जगह पैर टूटा हुआ है। रेड लाइट कार थी उस समय, मैंने तो से लाल लाइट मैंने ही कैंसिल किए सब। पर पहले वो रेड लाइट कार में पुलिस प्रोटेक्शन में मैं लीडर ऑफ ऑपोजिशन था महाराष्ट्र में। 2004 में मेरा एक्सीडेंट हुआ, मेरी पत्नी, मेरी बेटी, मेरा लड़का था, बहुत बड़ा एक्सीडेंट हुआ, हम बच गए सब। तो मैं इसके लिए समझता हूँ आज मरने वालों की संख्या
जी,
आप हमको मदद करिए। 18 से 24 वयोगट के 60% लोग मर रहे हैं। कोई इंजीनियर है, कोई डॉक्टर है, किसी का एक लड़का परिवार का चला गया, लड़की चली गई, बहुत ही कठिन स्थिति है। और इसमें लोगों के ह्यूमन बिहेवियर जब तक नहीं बदलेगा
जी,
तो ये गाड़ी में, रोड इंजीनियरिंग में तो हम कर ही रहे हैं, लेन डिसिप्लिन, ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस को सुधार कर रहे हैं, पर इसमें आखिर लोगों से भी सहयोग चाहिए
जी।
और हम लोग अभी 670 रोड साइड एम्यूनिटीज बना रहे हैं, वहाँ हेलीपोर्ट बना रहे हैं कि ऑर्गन डोनेशन दे सकते तो होना चाहिए, या उसकी जान बचाने के लिए उसको तुरंत हॉस्पिटल में लेके जाए। तो कोशिश कर रहे हैं, हमने कोशिश में कुछ कम नहीं किया है
जी।
पर सच्चाई ये कि हम इसमें जितने प्रमाण में कामयाब होने चाहिए वो नहीं हो पाए।
सर, मेरे बस 2 आखिरी सवाल हैं। एक, मेंटेनेंस ऑफ रोड्स एंड हाईवेज, एक तो नए ग्रीनफील्ड प्रोजेक्ट्स जो आप बना रहे हैं, एक जो पुराने प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, जैसे आपने बताया दिल्ली जयपुर हाईवे, और इतने सारे प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं जिनका वेयर एंड टेयर शुरू हो गया है, उनको ठीक करके उनको वापस शुरू करना। जैसे मैं किसी से बात कर रही थी मुंबई में, अंधेरी में एक फ्लाईओवर है जो कि 2018 से बंद पड़ा हुआ है, टूट गया था और उसके बाद से वो बंद पड़ा हुआ है, वहां पे कुछ काम नहीं हुआ है। 90 करोड़ कॉस्ट है उसको ठीक करने की। लेकिन
जो एयरपोर्ट के सामने बोल रहे हैं आप?
जी, अंधेरी के पास
क्योंकि मुंबई में 55 फ्लाईओवर मैंने ही बनाया, इसलिए मैं सब तो हो गया अभी। आप कौन सा बोल रहे हैं मेरे ध्यान में नहीं है।
मेरे पास लिखा हुआ एक्चुअली सर, मैं अभी आपको बताती हूँ। गोखले ब्रिज इन अंधेरी, शायद
वो 1 महीने पहले उसका इनॉग्रेशन हुआ है, वो हमारा कारपोरेशन का है।
अच्छा जी, तो वही तो बीएमसी और बीएमसी, इंडियन रेलवेज और आपकी मिनिस्ट्री, ये 3 एजेंसीज हैं जो कि कोऑर्डिनेट करके उस पर काम कर सकती हैं। 2018 से वो बंद पड़ा हुआ है। बॉम्बे के लोग बहुत परेशान हैं।
मुंबई में अभी मेरी मुख्यमंत्री से बात हुई और जो चहल करके कमिश्नर थे उनसे हुई, तो मुंबई में मैंने उनको कहा कि जो बिटुमिन रोड है ये इसको आप पूरा निकाल कर 6 या 8 इंच का वाइट टॉपिंग होता है कंक्रीट का, तो 25 से 30 साल कुछ होता ही नहीं। मैं तो भाषण में पब्लिकली मेरे गांव में देता हूँ, जितने लोग अभी तक जिंदे वो, फिर उनके बच्चे जिंदे तब तक, फिर उनके बच्चे जिंदे तब तक, 3 पीढ़ियों को रोड में गड्ढा नहीं पड़ेगा। और पड़ा ही नहीं है। आप नागपुर आइए तो देखो, कंक्रीट रोड ये बेस्ट सोल्यूशन है। जहाँ ब्लैक कॉटन सॉइल है, जहाँ बरसात ज्यादा होती है, जहाँ बरसात कम होती है, वहाँ सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट है कि रोड साइड ड्रेनेज सिस्टम चाहिए। ये हमारे यहाँ भी प्रॉब्लम है, हमारी ड्रेनेज सिस्टम बनी उसमें पानी बहता ही नहीं, सब कचरा भरा हुआ है। तो मैं पूछता है एनएचआई को, तुम क्यों ऐसा बोलती है? कारपोरेशन ने करना चाहिए। कारपोरेशन बोलते ये एनएचआई का है। तो इस टाइप के प्रॉब्लम्स हैं। तो कहीं ना कहीं हमको पानी बहने के लिए अच्छी व्यवस्था करनी पड़ेगी। दूसरी बात, मुंबई में अभी 6000 करोड़ रुपए की योजना उनने मंजूर की और मुंबई के पूरे बिटुमिन रोड ऑफ व्हाइट टॉपिंग में कंक्रीट में वो कन्वर्ट कर रहे हैं। तो ये जगह जगह पर कंक्रीट में कन्वर्ट करना अच्छा होगा। दूसरा, कंक्रीट के ऊपर बिटुमिन सरफेसिंग करना, उससे राइडिंग क्वालिटी, जर्मनी में आप जाओगे राइडिंग क्वालिटी भी अच्छी होती है, उसको कॉस्ट लगती है। एक्सपांशन जॉइंट्स, आप कभी मुंबई जाएगी तो जे हॉस्पिटल से वीटी के तरफ जाने वाले फ्लाईओवर पे जाइए, वो मेरे समय मैंने बनाया था, आज वो बनकर 23 साल हुए हैं। उस रोड के एक्सपांशन जॉइंट्स आज आपको कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं। हमारे यहाँ फिर एक्सपांशन जॉइंट्स में मैंने एक बार एनएचए को बोला, तुम्हारा एक भी पुल बताओ कि जिसमें एक्सपांशन जॉइंट अच्छे हैं। फिर हमने अभी उसके स्टैंडर्ड तय किए, काफी कुछ बातों में किया है। तो नेचुरली कुछ सीखते सीखते भी हमको करना चाहिए और क्वालिटी के बारे में धीरे धीरे शहरों के अंदर के रोड में व्हाइट टॉपिंग, कंक्रीटिंग करना, जिससे 25 साल 40 साल कुछ प्रॉब्लम नहीं आएगा।
पर महाराष्ट्र में बीजेपी की सरकार है, आप यहाँ आप मिनिस्टर हैं, फिर भी काम क्यों नहीं हो पाया? ये मेरा सवाल
ये हुआ ना
है कि इंटर एजेंसी कोऑर्डिनेशन।
अभी मुंबई का जो मैंने बताया कि 6000 करोड़ का कंक्रीट रोड बनाने का प्रोजेक्ट हो गया फाइनल, टेंडर निकल गया।
जी नहीं, मैं ये ब्रिज स्पेसिफिकली की बात कर रही थी।
ये ब्रिज मुझे पता नहीं है।
अच्छा।
आप जो बता रहे तो मैं इंक्वायरी करूंगा और मैं कंसर्न लोगों को बताऊंगा। गोखले रोड बता रहे ना
जी 2024 में चुनाव है, आपकी कोई प्रेडिक्शन कि कितनी सीट्स लेके आएगी बीजेपी इस बार? एक तो हमें सर नंबर चाहिए।
देखिए, जिस प्रकार से 2014 के बाद 2024 तक 10 साल में जितना काम हुआ है, इसका कंपैरिजन पुराने सरकार के साथ अगर करेंगे तो मैं ये विश्वास के साथ कह सकता हूँ कि 60-65 साल में जो वो नहीं कर सके, वो हमने 10 साल में काम किया है। और देश की इकोनॉमी फास्टेस्ट ग्रोइंग इकोनॉमी है। आज देश में अच्छा इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर तैयार हो रहा है, इन्वेस्टमेंट आ रही है और मुझे लगता है कि निश्चित रूप से वर्ल्ड में, अभी आपको ऑटोमोबाइल इंडस्ट्री की बात बताता हूँ। पहले हम लोग चौथे नंबर पे थे और जापान तीसरे नंबर पर था। अभी हम तीसरे नंबर पर गए, जापान चौथे नंबर पे गया। अब पहले नंबर पर चाइना, दूसरे पर यूएसए, तीसरे पे इंडिया और चौथे पे जापान गया। तो हमारे यहाँ लगातार प्रगति हो रही है और इसके कारण लोग पॉजिटिव अप्रोच में मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में हमारे पार्टी को सपोर्ट करेंगे और 2024 में हमको अच्छी सफलता मिलेगी, ऐसा मेरा विश्वास है।
Thank you so much, sir. I will not push you to give me a number on seats, but we wish you the very best. And everyone was very interested in this conversation क्योंकि जो आप काम करते हैं उससे directly हमारी lives impact होती है. So thank you so much for taking out the time and being here.
Namaskar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gadkari and Shweta, for that very candid conversation. I would request the Minister to please stay on the stage and invite Binoy to please give a token of appreciation to the Honorable Minister. Request the Minister to please continue being on the stage, sir. Would request other panelists to please come on the stage for a group photograph. I would invite all the other panelists on the stage, please, for a group photograph. Thank you, Honorable Minister, and all the other panelists. A big round of applause for all of them. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we wrap up this evening. I would like to thank all the esteemed speakers, thought leaders, and all of you for being a very wonderful audience. And we hope to be back with many more such conversations. Please join us for the dinner and cocktails. Thank you once again and enjoy your evening.